Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Jones. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Board for today. This is the 6 p.m. meeting. The chair sends apologies, and I, in the vice chair, will be taking the chair for this meeting. So we have a bit of housekeeping. And I hope that I will actually be able to cover all the items in the housekeeping. This is a virtual meeting, so it will operate in a slightly different manner to how we normally do. There is an instant messaging, which everyone is familiar with. So if you wish to speak, if you could please type RTS in the instant messaging bar, which is request to speak. And obviously, as chair, I will call you in turn as you have put RTS on the instant messaging bar. If we need to go to any recommendations, of which there needs to be a vote, then I will pass over to Chris Harrod, who will be clerking for us this evening, and he will call each member up individually to cast their vote. So you either say for, against, or abstain as you see fit. If I could also ask politely that the message bar, where possible, if we could keep it for just people wanting to speak, particularly board members, because in the previous meeting, I think we had various comments being put on and it was starting to confuse because the list kind of got longer and longer and longer. But if anyone is making a recommendation, then by all means, please put that in the message bar, because then it will be visible for everyone to see rather than Mr. Harrod having to read that out to us several times. So I think that I've actually covered everything that needs to be covered under that section. And if I've missed anything, Mr. Harrod will probably correct me. Have I covered everything, Mr. Harrod?
Thank you, Chair. Just one thing that we should perhaps make a note of is that this meeting is essentially being recorded for publication to the website, where the video will be kept for a minimum of 6 months. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Harrod. Right, so we now work our way through the agenda. The first item is apologies. Mr. Harrod.
Thank you, Chair. So apologies this evening from Councillors Broadhead, Iyengar and Miles.
And do we have substitute members?
Indeed we do. So Councillor Bobby Dove will be substituting for Councillor Broadhead. Councillor Karen Rampton will be substituting for Councillor Iyengar, and Councillor LJ Evans will be substituting for Councillor Pete Miles. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Next item, declarations of interest. We already have some in the message bar, so I'll call Councillor Mike Green.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got two. The first one, I don't really know how to describe it, so maybe I could ask Mr. Harrod to give us a help on it. But it's with respect to item 7, the planning report and the supplementary planning document go to Cabinet for BCP. I've been involved as part of the group that has put together the draft SPD, and therefore I would be effectively scrutinising myself. As I understand it, I would be asked to come in, if I would like to, after the portfolio holders have spoken, but before the board then discusses it, and I won't be involved in the board's discussion. I have another one as well, but I don't know whether Mr. Harrod can tell me how I should describe that declaration.
Mr. Harrod, can you please advise?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and Councillor Green as well. Personally, I would describe it as a personal interest. I do not think it's pecuniary in the sense that there's no financial gain from it. However, because you have taken part in the formation of the SPD, it would certainly be a personal interest, and as such, the advice is, as you've just covered, is that you effectively remain out of the debate as such, and also any recommendations that go forward. But certainly, yes, in terms of coming after the portfolio holder, I think that's a suitable workaround for you. Thank you.
Thank you. If I may then.
And the second one, Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, with respect to item 15, the pool PSBO, in line with the declaration that we have of personal interest in the register of personal interests, I have an interest in company which in turn is part owner of a business premises within the pool town PSPO area. I haven't actually been advised, but I think that the wisest thing is to declare a pecuniary interest and so not to take part in the debate. And for completeness, as I think we've established is required, I have to announce that my partner has the same declaration. Obviously, she'll be making her own.
Okay, thank you for that. I have the next one is Councillor Nicola Green, please, for declarations of interest.
Thank you, Chair. It won't come as any surprise that mine is very similar to the previous one. So likewise, in line with my entry on the Register of Members' Interests, I believe I have a disclosable pecuniary interest as I have an interest in a business which is part owner of a property on Poole High Street, as has my partner. Accordingly, I shall take no part in the item. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. Next person I have is Councillor Bartlett, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. With regard to agenda item 13, feedback on the working group BH Live Leisure Services, it's a non-pecuniary interest, but I am a director of BH Live Enterprises Limited. It may form part of this discussion, but I am also on the working group for BH Live, so I think I can still engage with this item. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Mr. Harrod, is that acceptable, what Councillor Bartlett has said with regards to the exempt item BH Live? Would that be the correct way to proceed?
Yes, I think it's a rather unique position in the sense that Councillor Bartlett does very much have two hats to wear, and I think, as history has proven, Councillor Bartlett is very much capable of keeping the two roles separate and can therefore participate in the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Any more declarations? I'm not seeing any more in the message bar. And if that is all the declarations, I will now move on to the next item, which is public issues. Mr. Harrod, have you received any petitions, questions, statements?
No statements or questions have been received for this meeting.
Thank you for that. So we now move on to the first of the main agenda items, which is the Community Safety Partnership Report. And I understand that Councillor Slade will be presenting this item on behalf of Councillor Lewis Alliston. Councillor Slade, you are on the meeting. Yeah. So if I can pass over to you to present this item, please.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. I appreciate this. So just in introduction for this paper, the Community Safety Partnership is a statutory body which is set up to bring together the partners across the area of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole to tackle crime and disorder. It is chaired by ACC Julie Fielding from Dorset Police, so the Assistant Chief Constable, and the portfolio holder for communities and community safety actually sits on the body. The body has not met in person since COVID has come in place in its normal format, so I'm just going to cover how that has changed. The purpose of the Community Safety Partnership is to set annual priorities, and on pages 8 and 9 of the report you'll see that there's a list of issues under the priorities they set for this year, which were violent crime, child threats, antisocial behaviour and hate crime. And the intention in the first half of 2020 was to create a delivery plan which should have been put together in March at that meeting. That meeting obviously was cancelled due to the commencement of the COVID-19 social distancing measures, and the partnership at that time took the decision to narrow its focus to work exclusively on child exploitation, domestic violence and antisocial behaviour. So the report details how the partners have acted in reflection on these particular challenges over the last few months. They have continued to meet fortnightly with a focus on these areas, and I want to make particular references to some of the very targeted, innovative approaches that they've taken. In particular, the issues around safeguarding children in relation to the complex safeguarding team and the sort of top 10 of children who are missing or at risk, the development of a domestic abuse strategy, which is a fantastic piece of work, which is almost ready and complete, and the new approach to antisocial behaviour, which the police use the term SARA, which is now being implemented in a number of specific areas. So for reference, SARA relates to scanning, analysis, response and assessment. So it's a model that's used by the police and that the community safety partnership have started to implement. This paper has been seen by the chair of the board. The role of the Opium Scrutiny Board is to scrutinise the work of the Community Safety Partnership in its entirety, not specifically the council's involvement in the safety partnership. And obviously this report is slightly different than it might have been had we not entered into a period of a global pandemic. It's worth mentioning, if you look through at some of the specific actions that have been taken with regards to antisocial behaviour, areas like the bus station in Poole, West Hill, Bournemouth Gardens and Somerford, but then also a group that has been working in Ashley Cross and Sandbanks and the Heathlands areas as well. So a lot of work's being done with partners. The Community Safety Partnership is meeting in its full status again in September. I will be attending that in lieu of Councillor Anderson if he isn't back at that point. We believe there may be a change of chair coming up within the police. The police have reorganised again and they're looking at potentially moving this over to a different assistant chief constable, and they are looking at, they believe that it's appropriate for the leader of the council to sit on this partnership as an additional sort of observer. So that may well be a change coming forward, but that will obviously be reported in the next paper. So I'm happy to take questions. I would just add, I haven't attended a community safety partnership myself, but I have been briefed, and if I need any information about content of meetings, I do have officers with me that may be able to give you that information. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Slade. I have Councillor Bartlett to speak on this.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I had a quick look through. I had a look through the paper, and I noticed that there's a single BCP domestic abuse helpline that's been set up, and I noticed it says developed in the paper, but I thought I would just try the website, the Bournemouth website, to see if I could contact the helpline recently. I couldn't find a number for it, not easily anyway. I certainly was unable to find. So I guess that the helpline is probably still under development. And I just wanted to ask the question: is it live yet? And if it is live, can we please get the number on the website where you can see it easily? That's all. Thank you.
I will defer to an officer on that, but I think that it's probably worth mentioning at this point, Councillor Bartlett, that you will be aware there have been some difficulties in the last few weeks around locating the appropriate telephone numbers for things on the website, so it's been moved around. I know during the lockdown there was a very clear domestic abuse helpline number shown on the COVID pages, because I went through that in some detail, but the pages have all been moved around. But I don't know whether Andy Williams is able to confirm if that number is now live.
Yes, I can. Councillor Bartlett, it is live. It was developed in the first few weeks of the lockdown. There has been quite a bit of publicity that we've done jointly with Dorset Police around this helpline number and other sources of help as well. And I'll make sure, if it's not readily accessible on the website, that we get that sorted. It may be that because of some of the changes to the website that have been made recently, that's moved somewhere, but I can have a look at that.
I'm looking at the page at the moment, and the page about domestic abuse has got a lot of numbers on it, I think it's fair to say, and it may well be that I probably wouldn't be quite sure which option to take if I was in need. So I think that's a really fair comment, actually, Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, I noted the long list of numbers, but there wasn't one that said BCP Domestic Abuse Helpline, and that's what prompted me to ask the question. Thank you.
I'm glad you did, because yeah, I wouldn't quite know where to start.
Okay, thank you for raising that point, Councillor Bartlett. Probably a bit more clarity there would be helpful. Is there anyone else who wants to? Okay, Councillor Mellor has indicated. Councillor Mellor, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. You'll know particularly that community safety is a priority that we're continuing to raise. Just wondering if the leader could comment on, you talked about the child sexual abuse work, which is important. I'm wondering, will there be a school inspection officer in post, as we suggested in our plan? The feeling behind that was to ensure robust education on drugs and other harms is tackled. Also, maybe I'll do all of my questions in one go, Chair, to allow the portfolio holder to respond. Moving on to thank you, Chair. Moving on to the ASB elements. I think one thing, we've looking at what the council can actually do here and where we stand up is effectively the no broken windows type approach, where all departments really prioritise activities around hotspot ASB. So street lighting, foliage cutting, graffiti removal, licensing, etc. So all of these problems can be started and solved quickly. So some sort of comment around how we're engaging in that would be great. And the last one was just around the sort of expansion of the CSAS officers, which we fully appreciate and have been talking about for some time. We'd like to see a bit further. Just with my own ward councillor hat on, we've got some serious ASB in Charminster, and although the expansion of CSAS is good, we've consistently called for more officers because this doesn't get us to Charminster. So if the leader could sort of comment on that, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, well, if I start by taking the approach of cutting grass and repairing streetlights and graffiti, this is not what the Community Safety Partnership is about. The Community Safety Partnership is about concentrating on the focused areas of harm. The issues around general neighbourhood things is dealt with by the general neighbourhood things, and it wouldn't be appropriate for the senior officers of organisations like the police and the fire service and the ambulance service to be having to get involved with those matters. So I don't think that's something for the Community Safety Partnership. That's something for our general budget holders. Clearly, we all want to see more money being spent on things like street lighting and graffiti removal, but we are living in times where we've had 10 years of austerity, £103 million a year cut from the budget, and these things have to be done on a basis of the levels of harm. So in terms of cutting the grass and making sure that lights are repaired quickly, that is a matter that the departments have to do within the budgets that they have. In terms of issues around drugs officers in schools, again, the children's team are directly working around their approach with schools. There is a review of education going on with the engagement between the schools and the council and the police around drugs education. So that's an active piece of work at the moment. That's not really the focus of the child exploitation. This is around these really serious matters of county lines. We've had some dreadful instances of young people that are being abused from afar, and that's the work that the police have been heavily involved with here. The missing children returning from home, the social work cases, and also a lot of our youth outreach team have been moved across at the moment to focus on those children and young people who, being outside of education for a 6-month period, are deemed to be at a higher level of risk. And the complex safeguarding team is referenced and explained in this report. So that work is being led. This community safety partnership is about dealing with the multi-agency matters, not the internal matters. When it comes to the general level of sort of ASB and CSAS, we have increased the number of CSAS officers that are working for BCP Council already. That has actually been increased in Bournemouth and introduced in Poole. And if you look at the paper that's coming later on, we are looking at a wider CSAS approach across the piece. I think I've already flagged on a number of occasions the work that's being done around a town team in Bournemouth, where the town rangers, the PCSOs for Bournemouth Town Centre, and the CSAS officers, we're looking to work together with the BID and the police to actually try and make sure that we can get the most effective people out on the ground. And by actually looking at the PSPOs across the whole of BCP, which is the paper coming later on, then we're not limited to being able to influence things like seizing alcohol and dealing with aggressive antisocial behaviour in just the areas where we have a PSPO. And that's one of the great advantages of the paper that's coming later on. So yes, clearly, if there was a lot more money, we'd have a lot more officers in every department, but we're working with what we've got. We've increased the numbers from where we were last year, so we haven't decreased anything. We've actually increased on what the former councils have, which I think is a good thing, but there is a way to go. One of the specifics around Poole, I would just add, is you know, some of the work that's been done to reduce antisocial behaviour at the bus station. The police have said yes, that is working.
Councillor Slade, because we are actually on a time, so if I could maybe move on to the next speaker, and then if there's time you can come back on those other points you wish to make. So if I can call on the next speaker, Councillor Miller, does that answer your questions?
Yeah, I'll briefly respond. Thank you, Chair. I appreciate you trying to move this forward. You know, the school inspection officer that we've put forward, or officers, 2 officers that we put forward, is a direct intervention, an early intervention into, you know, county lines drug screening, and it is, you know, something that you know your officers do support. So I just, you know, there is more of a connection to it there than you're saying. And then lastly, to, you know, it's you know, we have, you've mentioned a few times about not having enough money. We've put forward a very clearly worked out you know, view on how we can actually put more money into priority areas. And the fact that, you know, we would be, and I do commend actually, you know, Leader, I certainly do commend the extra CSAS officers and your commitment to that. So, you know, let me be clear, that's, you know, I appreciate that. I'm just saying, you know, I believe that antisocial behaviour should be a high priority of this council, and there are ways of affecting it more positively than we are doing. But I also do appreciate we've come away you know, and there is more investment going in. So thank you, Chair. I'll move on, allow others to speak.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next,
come back on that.
No, hang on, Councillor Slade. Can I just call the next speaker, please? Councillor Rampton.
Oh yes, thank you, Chair. I do wonder if perhaps Councillor Mello didn't have time to sort of correct the leader's possible misunderstanding of what his original point was. Obviously, this is not about senior officers getting involved and cutting grass. I think what he actually meant was cutting back foliage, because we all know that foliage can become overgrown. It obstructs the striker cameras. It allows antisocial behaviour to occur. People sort of shelter in bushes and so on. And we know from when we had antisocial behaviour in Halls Bay, in Poole, just cutting back those bushes actually made a huge difference. So of course it's not about senior officers getting involved in things like that. But what it's about, surely, and what the CSP is about, is making sure that there are very clear and very well understood protocols, so that we and residents clearly understand who's responsible for something. So is it the police? Is it the council? Is it a partnership with others? Because otherwise you do get this kind of well, it's not our problem, it's the council's. Well, it's not our problem, it's the police. When actually, of course, we need to work together as a system to tackle this. And so that, I think, is what the CSP is about. I'm not sure that it's clear enough. As Councillor Mellor referred to, we do have an issue at the moment in our ward where there needs to be a multi-agency report, but actually we spend a huge amount of time trying to go through various officers. We have regular meetings with police, and they're fantastic. We have a great relationship with them, but we do tend to sort of bounce around from officer to officer, and what there needs to be is a clear protocol. So if there's an issue, a hotspot in one area, then we can have a multi-agency approach to deal with that problem and then move on to the next one once that's sorted. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Councillor Mellor, but I think that's what he was trying to articulate, and perhaps that was misunderstood. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so
Councillor Slade? Yeah, sure.
On several things. The first thing to say is that what I was trying to explain before, unfortunately, I was asked to stop, was exactly the point that was being made around cutting. For example, you gave the example of cutting back things. Was the closure of the alleyways at the bus station is exactly what the SARA team, the SARA approach, actually identified, that by closing off those alleyways, that would disrupt the movements of people who were engaged in antisocial behaviour. The cutting back of foliage clearly was delayed due to COVID, but that sort of thing is being discussed. You know, everyone knows that the route in to deal with those specific issues in their ward. We all know how to use Report It. We all have contacts that we're able to approach to get specific things done. The Kelly Ansell has started a new relationship between the MPTs and ward councillors. Those meetings are now happening every month, and ward councillors are encouraged to come and talk to the senior officers in those in the police to actually look at all of the issues. I know Councillor Haynes was at the one for Poole a couple of weeks ago, and we went through an awful lot of details around where the hotspots were. So the hotspots are being treated. The hotspots are referenced in the paper as well. And just to go back around Councillor Mellor, I totally understand that you champion a particular type of approach of drug education in school, but actually what we've done is said, let's see what the professionals are saying, and our professionals are setting up an adolescent hub where they're actually doing what they believe is the right thing to do, and we're being led by the people who understand child behaviour, working with the police and other agencies. So it may be called something different to what you might like it to be called, but the work that's being done around safe schools, the adolescent hub and the complex safeguarding is absolutely around focusing on those young people's risks with drug taking. So I think all of that is being covered.
Chair, I'll just come back very briefly on that. You know, to suggest I'm trying to support something that the professionals aren't supporting. You know, your own officers in agreement with us that the early intervention school inspection officers would be a positive. And also, you know, and in terms of the adolescent hub, you know, we believe that intervention needs to happen early. This council needs to offer, you know, a more of a priority around early intervention, and our school inspection officer plan was exactly that, and it was exactly supported by professionals.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll go on to the next speaker. Councillor Nicola Green, please.
Go away.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Slade, for picking this up. And I just have a couple of questions for you, really. And it starts from, as a ward councillor, you, I know, are very well aware of the West Hill issues. We have some of the, a number of the same emails. So I'm really pleased to see the focus of the CSP on here. And obviously that of young people as well. My question really is about how we go forward from here, because the paper sets out very clearly what the thinking is. What it doesn't quite set out for me, and apologies if it's in there, it's about actions and not outcomes. And so what I'm wondering, I note that there is in paragraph 36 the proposal to move this forward into a crime disorder reduction strategy and action plan. Is that where we're going to find the nitty-gritty? And is that consequent? Firstly, where will that go? Will this body see it, or will it be dealt with elsewhere through some other council body? May well be. But just in terms of when we will have the opportunity, bearing in mind that your words when we started this item, that it's our responsibility to scrutinise the work of the CSP, where we will actually be able to do that when we've seen what those outcomes are, and at that point we can start piling on, can't we, with where we think we ought to go next. But I haven't got from this paper any sense of outcomes thus far.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Is it okay if I respond to that, Councillor Haynes?
Yes, please, Councillor Slade.
Sure. So the domestic abuse strategy is, I believe, already on the forward plan. The crime and disorder plan will be coming to Cabinet in due course. There's a lot of these strategies which we would have had onto the forward plan in the next sort of 6 months or so. But clearly the work of the whole community safety partnership was paused to simply focus on those COVID related issues. And because it is actually led by the police, we are a partner in that, but it is actually led and chaired by the police. We have to be led by their work on that. The delivery plan, as I think is noted in the paper, was delayed by COVID. So I think it is fair to say that, if you imagine everything is 3 to 6 months behind, that's really unfortunate. But those strategies will all come via overview and scrutiny. Well, they all have the opportunity to come via overview and scrutiny board because they would have to be signed off by Cabinet. So I absolutely give you that assurance. In terms of West Hill, you will be aware I spend a lot of my time trying to support officers with the particular problems around West Hill. We are making some progress. We had made some good progress, I think you'll agree, before the pandemic hit. And I think it's incredibly unfortunate that because of the capacity in that area with extremely low cost accommodation and the very limited ability for us to put people into temporary accommodation, it has caused some issues. However, it is fair to say that dedicated staff have been put into that area. There is a SARA specifically for the West Hill area. There's a dedicated officer, and I think, I'm not sure whether you were copied into the last email that I sent to the local residents, but I'm happy to copy you in, Councillor Green, around we are getting very close to being able to move the vast majority of the individuals on to other places, including some really good assessment centres and more permanent accommodation. So I'm hoping the light is at the end of the tunnel, and I'm hoping some of the approach around CSAS that we're looking to bring in with the PSPO in the paper later on will help us to be able to address some of the other behaviours which are a problem in places like Westcliff Green.
Thank you, Chair. May I come back on that?
Yes, please do.
Thank you for that, Councillor Slade. I know how much work goes on, and the fact that there are still ongoing issues is a testament to how many issues there are, given how much work is done. But going back to the role of this board in scrutinising all those things, I do wonder whether, and sorry, this is an issue for the board, not for the portfolio holder in this instance, about perhaps whether we need to consider a slightly different model for scrutinising this, because you've referred to a number of strategies, and I'm sure there are many more, and given that responsibility sits in one place alongside the very clear delegated Cabinet responsibilities, whether perhaps as a board we might want to give some thought as to whether we need to do a piece of work around scrutinising everything that comprises that. I don't think it's a discussion for today, Chair, but I do think it's something that we need to make absolutely sure that we are not letting fall by the wayside. We understand the impact of COVID and how that has affected and delayed things, but that doesn't obviate our responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Councillor Green, and I think you made a very good point about outcomes. So I think it's also a case of measures of success. So we have a strategy here, which is new because we are a new council here, and it would be nice to see how effective the strategy has been. So I think, like you say, it's not a discussion for now, but certainly something as a board we need to consider. If I move on to the last speaker for this will be Councillor Trent, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm actually surprised that other councillors haven't had a response from BCP on issues like that. I have to say that my experience is that the local antisocial behaviour team is brilliant at responding. They've actually come up with the goods, they've helped sort things out. It's a little bit more of a challenge when it involves the police. But we've had youth outreach teams because we have an antisocial behaviour hotspot on the border between my ward and the adjacent Newtown and Heatherlands ward. But the underlying thing underneath all of this is the fear that County Lines is reaching its evil little fingers into that area, and I'm rather hoping that when the children go back to school that we do find a way of bringing back more positive activities for young people. I think there's some thinking going on about that, and certainly I'm hoping to come up with some ideas later on this week to feed into that, because when you've got a lot of young people wandering around, they haven't got the structure of school. They might have, they might speak to a youth outreach worker, but they haven't got anywhere to send them. And I really think that part of the battle against young people getting involved in crime and disorder is actually distracting them away from that, because you can bet your bottom dollar that the people that are up to no good, that are trying to spread county lines, are probably working very hard and very effective under the radar. So, as I say, I've had a positive experience, but I do really think that we need to support our young people, and not just, you know, in some ways, if you have to come up with the heavy-handed approach, it's too late. You actually need to prevent rather than come down heavy-handed when it's too late. And I really think that our priority, and it's certainly been reflected by a meeting earlier on this year with the Police and Crime Commissioner, where you have positive activities for young people, you do actually have less youth offending. There are some statistics to back that up.
Okay, thank you for your comments, Councillor Trent. I didn't actually hear a question in that. It was more comments and what you would like to see, particularly in the area where you are very closely involved with. But I don't know, Councillor Slade, if you wanted to make some quick comments on that.
Very quickly, just to say the measures of success is what's going to be in the delivery plan, and it's the delivery plan that's been delayed. So clearly, you know, it would have been great to have had that, but that's not feasible at the moment. The antisocial behaviour team, there is some real concerns, I think, about stepping over into police matters. Quite a lot of the issues that come forward with people being frustrated, actually our teams are having to do things that perhaps the police would have previously done, and I'm trying to sort of walk a very fine line between behaving as one team in an area, but also recognising what is the role of the police, what is the role of the council's ASB team. And just on youth facilities, I have chased today that the rules relating to restarting positive activities are quite complicated because they often work across several schools and in different sort of spaces, and there is a new officer I was introduced to today, who is Jo Fry, who's an operational manager for youth services, and she's going to be working with us across BCP in respect of that. So there was a paper circulated to all councillors about 3 weeks ago with the list of all of the appropriate contacts in terms of officers for community safety matters. I'd be very happy, Councillor Haynes, to get that recirculated if some members aren't sure who they should be speaking to on various matters.
Okay, thank you for that offer, Councillor Slade. I think there's no harm in recirculating that information. Councillor Trent, you have a supplementary, a new point?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It was a point I actually forgot to ask about on the other one. I know that we have this briefing with police, and these are going to continue, but when are we likely to see the return of the Safer Neighbourhood teams, which was a partnership with the police, council officers, youth workers, everyone who's got an interest in the area? Because I thought that worked really well, and I would hope that we bring them back and bring them on a localised enough basis that we can actually be focused on things and involve residents. And I wonder whether that is in line to come back.
So what I can confirm is that the Safer Neighbourhood teams actually turned into MPTs. So the Safer Neighbourhood team became a neighbourhood police team. And some areas never had the sort of meetings that you indicate that you had in your area. One of the things that we were looking at implementing before COVID came in was a consistent approach. And at the moment, those conversations are still happening in some areas. That was never something that was possible. And there's also an issue around what is the role of the public in these groups, because again, inconsistently in some areas public meetings or round tables were held, in other areas it was only officers and members. So the team is looking with the police at what they can facilitate, but the police do have significant resource issues. Being able to commit to those things is something they found quite difficult in the last year or so. So I will keep bringing it up, and I would encourage all members to attend their MPT engagement meetings that the police have started. And the more that we say we need to do these, the more chance we've got of those inspectors accepting that actually this is the way forward. But there is an community safety delivery plan coming. But I'm with you, Councillor Trent. I do think sometimes you need to sit in a room and bang some heads together, metaphorically speaking, so that we can make sure we're all doing the same thing.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Slade. No one else has indicated to speak. Listening to the discussion, I didn't pick up that there was any specific recommendations that members would like to put forward. So we'll just, when we go to Cabinet, we'll just reiterate some of the comments that have been made about concerns about county lines, concerns about perhaps keeping foliage hedges chopped down where there's known to be ASB hotspots. So if members are content with that, then I will move on to the next item. Now, we have a choice. We can either look at the PSPO item next, because it does tie in with the Community Safety Partnership, because it was actually a late item to the agenda. If members are content to do that, we'll move on to that. Otherwise, we will follow what was actually set out in the public agenda. If you're not happy to go on to PSPO, please let me know and I will put that as the last item. No? Okay. So if we're happy to proceed with the next item, which is the Public Space Protection Order report, I believe Councillor Slade, that will be yourself again on behalf of Councillor Allison.
Oh, yes, that is me as well. So thank you very much for bringing this forward. I'm sure officers are pleased that they're going to do both their papers in one go. So I'm sure you'll all be very aware that the PSPO in Poole and Hulls Bay area has been under review to remove a number of the clauses. A full consultation did go through. The results of the consultation are shown within the paper. And you'll see there was a real split of opinion from people who either felt that the way that it was currently being addressed wasn't particularly humane, whilst there was a very similar number of people who felt that they wanted to see a harsher enforcement model. It was very much on a knife point as to how people felt about it, but there was marginally a couple more people in favour of making the amendments to the PSPO. The approach historically, particularly for members who might not be aware of how it operated, the officers who did the PSPO in Poole were not CSAS style officers. They were enforcement officers who were able to serve a notice of prosecution to give a fine. And during the time of the PSPO, a total of 3 prosecutions were attempted for £100 each, but only one prosecution was successful because there was only one person in a position to make the payment of the £100. The PSPO, the officers involved with enforcing the PSPO did not have the option of seizing the alcohol. They don't have the same powers as CSAS officers just to make the prosecution. So it didn't actually have the impact that perhaps people thought that it might have. The intention is to move to a CSAS approach, which will enable the underlying causes of antisocial behaviour to be dealt with. It's also worth commenting, as I'm sure you're aware, there's been a legal challenge from Liberty, where they're very uncomfortable. They believe that this particular public space protection order is targeting rough sleepers, and by amending it in the way that's recommended in the paper enables us to remove that focus on a particular client group and actually focus on the behaviours, not the people. The second part of the paper, and this is what I was referring to earlier, is asking Cabinet to open up a consultation on a BCP-wide PSPO, Public Space Protection Order, so we can address the changing issues as and when they are formed. So exactly as Councillor Mellor suggested, problems in Charminster develop, or problems in Ashley Cross have developed, or at the beach, we can actually use the same piece of legislation and the same group of officers, which we can expand as it becomes more effective, to deal with the behaviours. There are about 5 or 6 existing PSPOs in various places, including Christchurch and Bournemouth, which will be removed and replaced with this single PSPO. And the other thing which you may have noticed under item 12 is there's an opportunity for us to include other behaviours which, I quote, can have a detrimental effect on the quality of life of people in the locality and are likely to be seen as unreasonable. So the particular behaviour that we feel we could go to consultation on is camping. It's actually beach camping in the paper, because that has proved incredibly difficult for the bylaw to be implemented. The PSPO does give more immediate powers and more immediate powers to act rather than get someone's name and address and start a prosecution, which doesn't actually remove the problem, which is what the bylaw does at the moment. The general consensus is that by removing the clauses as per the paper, we have the same type of PSPO across the whole area, and that we can use CSAS to deal with aggressive begging, illegal camping, seize alcohol from people who shouldn't have it, and generally deal with various bits of antisocial behaviour, rather than it specifically targeting a group of people. So a lot of work has gone into this. If it is approved, then it will give the delegation to the Director of Communities to go straight back out to consultation, hopefully in October, in the hope that the consultation can come back and we can have a new PSPO in place early in the new year if it's successful.
Thank you. Right, I have Councillor Rampton, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is a very interesting paper, isn't it? I do remember a council meeting in the days when we actually had proper council meetings and we all could see each other. That the cabinet member actually praised the pool PSPO in a council meeting and said how well it was working. And the PSPO in pool was brought in to tackle antisocial behaviour, and it wasn't to discriminate against any particular groups, and it actually worked. And people who were displaying antisocial behaviour did actually become engaged for the most part, not with everybody, I have to say. What I find interesting about this consultation, A, that it's really brief, the number of responses were fairly small, 199 responses, and it was carried out during a time during lockdown, when actually the problem didn't really exist to the same extent in the town centres. So I find that odd, but the thing that I really find very peculiar is the results. So what this paper is suggesting is that A, F and G are left in. But for example, E, which is causing an obstruction in car park, doorways, etc., 54% of those people who responded to the survey disagreed with removing that, and yet the paper suggests that that actually is removed. They're all very close. I mean, like, which one is it? C, 50% of people were kind of ambivalent about sitting and loitering with a receptacle used to contain monies. Begging, 51% agreed. It is all so incredibly close. So I cannot understand the rationale behind this paper to say that those items should be removed when it goes out to consultation conurbation-wide, because it's just not clear what people really thought about it. I'm also a bit confused because reading through the paper about the powers that CSAS officers would have, they actually would have discretion on issuing FPNs if people didn't comply with the PSPO. So there is some mitigation there, isn't there? There is a way of using officer discretion not to issue a fine for the antisocial behaviour if the officer thought that was appropriate. So I really cannot understand why out of the clauses in the original PSPO, only 3 have been left in. We know that people leaving unattended belongings causes quite a lot of anxiety for people, not just the people who leave the belongings, but the people who might come across them. There could be actually anything in there. And in these days, these really uncertain times, there could actually be something quite dangerous wrapped up in belongings and just left there. I just think it's really odd that we would allow that clause to be removed. Causing an obstruction, well, shopkeepers, now that the shops are all opening up again, the shopkeepers do not want people obstructing their doorways, especially in these times of COVID. So I'm not happy with this report. I'm not happy with the consultation brief, because I think the results have been partially ignored, and I would actually like to propose an amendment to this paper, which is to say that those clauses which have been removed should be reinstated, and that is what should go out to consultation. I was a portfolio holder in Poole when this was introduced. It worked. officers told me on a regular basis when I had briefings with them that it worked. I see no reason to try and limit these restrictions on people when we do have the mitigation of the CSAS officers. And I seek a seconder. I see Councillor Mellors happy to second.
Happy to second, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So we now have a proposal which has been duly seconded, which is to, can I just check with you, Councillor Rampton, that you want all of them, all the clauses reinstated, or did you want specific ones reinstated?
A to G, Chair.
Okay, which has been duly seconded. So I also have an indication of people that wanted to speak prior to this. So what I'm going to do now is, who wants to speak to the proposed recommendation? I'll take those first.
Chair, I've put in a PO, point of order.
Hang on. Okay, yes, if you want to tell us what your PO is, Councillor Brooke.
Fine, Chair, will do if I can get my video up. As I understand it, this amendment would actually negate the formal motion and therefore, according to our constitution, cannot be allowed. I'd seek clarification, please.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Harrod, are you able to advise, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. If you bear with me for just a short moment, I shall confirm, okay?
Chair, if it helps, it's Graham Farrington. I think I thought what we had was a proposal from Councillor Rampton to recommend to the Cabinet that the recommendation should be as follows. So I don't think this is a specific negation of a motion that is put forward, unless I've misread the situation. I don't know if we can confirm that.
Okay, thank you for that. I think Mr. Harrod, did you hear Mr. Farron's comments?
I did indeed, thank you, Chair. I'm just confirming now. Madam Chair, committee members, just to confirm, I'm of the opinion that it does not negate the original motion. Ultimately, these are recommendations to Cabinet, and so the Cabinet can choose to either take on board the recommendations or not.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Harrod. So on that basis, because we have a proposal for recommendation which is duly seconded, I'm actually going to go to the speakers that indicated to speak after this was put forward. So Councillor Brooke, you've brought up the point about your point of order. So the next speaker up will be Councillor Anderson. Did you want to speak on the proposal?
Yes, Chairman, I did. As Councillor Mellor very much aware, we have an issue which they have intimated on in previous speeches in the Chelmsford area, very much antisocial behaviour, and it all relates and is linked all around these points of B, C, D, E, and F. And quite frankly, if we're having this problem in Chelmsford, I can't see why it's only unique to us, and I think it'd be unique across the whole of the conurbation. And I can also see that this is one of the biggest areas I get emails on, and also on various Facebook pages. So I'm very much in favour of supporting this.
Thank you for that. Next speaker is Councillor Millie Earle.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've got a few things to say, but I think it's particularly interesting, when we talk about percentages in favour and against. I don't think it's not legitimate to say that you know, we're 52% or 51% in favour of altering the PSPO, then we shouldn't go with it. You know, I know this has been a conversation that's been going on a very long time in terms of the context of Brexit, but on this, it's the same thing, and it does give a mandate to go ahead. But what I want to say more on the motion in general is, you know, this is a motion, or what Councillor Rampton's put forward does actually completely go against the whole point of the changes to the PSPO. You know, we're all aware that aggressive begging, intimidating behaviour, street drinking from some individuals does go on, and it's a pain to all of us. You know, in Ashley Road, it's a real blight on the area. However, PSPOs are used to fine individuals up to £100, if not £1,000 if they don't pay it, for incidents of antisocial behaviour. But the current policy, and from the amendment to change it back to that does directly impact those who are rough sleeping and those who are in need. And it's completely counterproductive to hand out a fine to someone who is already in poverty. And what I was really pleased about with the paper was actually that it looks at a more holistic approach, using the CSAS officers to direct people to services. And if we take out those points which directly impact people who are in need, people who are living in poverty, and punishes them for living in poverty, then I don't really know why we have that sort of policy in place, because it seems to me very cruel. So yeah, I just wanted to say, you know, I very much disagree with the amendment. I think we should take those out. It's a serious matter to be inflicting harm, inflicting on-the-spot fines onto people who are in poverty already. So I will not be voting in favour of the amendment or recommendation or proposal, whatever it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Earl. Councillor Farquhar?
Thank you very much, Chair. I very much support Councillor Earl's points here. I'd just like to rewind just for a second for the sake of the board. And I will do something different here, and I'll keep it as succinct as I can. Two things. The PSPO area has been extended for CSAS officers across the whole of the conurbation. So therefore, the PSPO will be applicable to wherever CSAS officers are deployed. At the moment, CSAS officers, or previously, pre-COVID, they were deployed in certain areas, such as Boscombe, such as Poole, and this gives them the opportunity to actually deploy to Ashley Road and to the subject matter which was talked about earlier, hotspots, whereby wards through the neighbourhood protection teams can actually request a CSAS officer to apply to PSPO. So, if we look at the PSPO in isolation, let's just remind ourselves, the organisation that's called Liberty was unhappy and did find that they believed that we should have a case in the High Court for a judicial ruling that it was prejudiced against rough sleepers and homeless people. That went out to public consultation, as was required, because any changes to a PSPO have to go out to public consultation, such as the PSPO, which is going to apply across the whole conurbation, will go out to public consultation, and people have their opportunity to say. And the results came back, and they're quite clear that the PSPO component parts should be changed. So I think that the purpose of this board is actually look at risk to the council and risk for the recommendations which go up. And if we want to risk reinstating these points to the PSPO, which will apply across the whole conurbation, even though the organisation of Liberty believes that it should have a judicial review, I think we're risking great expense, great time for our officers, for something which the people have already consulted on in a legal way to actually say that it should be removed. I think the three articles, the three component parts for the new PSPO are more than adequate for the CSAS officers, which replace what went before, and they have more powers to actually exercise their duties and use the discretion. And the final point which I'd make is that people say that it was a success. As Councillor Earl said, the point of a PSPO is to issue fines. In the history of the Poole one, 3 attempts to issue a fine, only 1 collected. That's not good use of public money to actually get £100 back in the term that the PSPO and pool was there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Farquhar. I have Councillor Mellor next.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really glad I am next to follow that last comment. We just heard that the point of a PSPO is to issue fines. You haven't kept up with this debate if you think that's what the point of this is. We've had this discussion before, as an earnest group. We've had it before in Paul at some length. Just taking a step back here, it's worth acknowledging that, I'm absolutely sure, Councillor Earl, it comes from a very heartfelt point around this. Councillor Rigby and I discussed this at the last time, and again, we're both coming at it from a genuine heartfelt position where we all want to assist people. Where I do have issue is the statement that there's a mandate to do it, like for Brexit 52-48 was actually the other way around, because 54% of people don't want to do this. So one, I think that's too close to call a mandate either side. But if we're going to be clear, 54% of people don't want to do this. Again, there is an evidence base, and this is what Councillor Rampton was implying. There is an actual evidence base to support, this PSPO. I was a member of a Health and Social Committee on the preceding Poole Council, and officers clearly came in and said this has been a success. This is useful, and it's not useful about fines. It's useful about intervention. It's about giving an opportunity to sit in front of people and actually say that's not acceptable. But how can we help you? The fact that only 3 people were tried to be prosecuted shows that it's not about fines. It's about intervention. And we all come back to this, and where this council seems to split itself on this issue is in dogma. Is the fact that the point of PSPOs is to issue fines. They're not counterproductive at all. And we need to look at the evidence. And also then again, I do massively support, and Councillor Slater and I have had this conversation, months ago, the extension of this, or the consultation around extension BCP wide, because we've got an issue BCP wide around ASB. Of the Southwest, we're second in the 10 Southwest authorities for ASB. That again is a fact. We need to address this. So I do support the single PSPO, but it needs to put back in, all of these all of these clauses. So effectively, you come to a point of, do you want to look at the evidence? And I admit it has to be carrot and stick, and and all of that work. This is not just in isolation, but we need to look at the evidence. Do you want to put enforcement as a priority or not? Or support as a priority or not? So I do, we do, and I fully support my colleague's motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mellor. I have Councillor Bartlett next, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. After the lockdown period sort of eased a bit and people started to go back into the town centre of Bournemouth, I thought I'd just take a wander around to see for myself whether the issues on homelessness had been addressed and whether it had affected the sort of begging around in and around the town centre. So on the 15th of July, I and a colleague did a quick walk around within a few hundred metres of the town centre, and what we actually found was there are four lots of bedding in doorways, two cases of drinking, 4 cases of begging, 1 case of somebody asleep in a doorway. And this was about midday in the town centre, just a few hundred metres, probably not that actually, between them. And so it was clear to me that, the measures that we have got in place aren't working because already the habits of the old seem to be coming back in already, even though the town centre at that point wasn't back to its maximum sort of footfall. Yes, of course, one has sympathy for people who are generally homeless and all the rest of it. But, my mind goes back to the 3 presentations that were made to us by the town bid managers and the surveys that they did, particularly in terms of the numbers of visitors coming to the town and how many of those visitors said they would not come back to the town, to Bournemouth town centre, because of the issues that they found in the town centre, where they were feeling intimidated actually by some of this. And so, Councillor Farquhar talks about risk. Well, actually, there's a huge risk to businesses. I spoke to a number of businesses in the town centre on that day who told me they were sick to death of the issues that were causing their businesses to suffer because of begging in the doorway outside their shops, etc. So yes, there is a huge risk to businesses. There's a risk to the town. And you talk about pain, I can assure you that the residents that go down the town are sick to death of going down the town and being confronted by this. Now, of course, as I said, I've got great sympathy for homelessness and people who are in genuine need. But there is an issue possibly about organised begging in the town. And I'm just thinking that we really need to have something much more structured. I think PSPO is probably the argument. So I will support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. I have Councillor Trent next, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we've really got to think why we ended up in the position we are in. And one of the things that contributed towards it was that a couple of years ago or so, Bournemouth and Poole were both nationally recognised as being places where we were dealing with things in a very inhumane, heavy-handed way, and that we weren't taking any kind of sympathetic view that, you know, there are genuine people in amongst that. We're just, you know, it was just assuming that everyone was a professional beggar and, you know, it was some organised thing. I think we've all got to realise that, you know, all of us are within probably a couple of paychecks or a breakdown or a personal tragedy away from potentially being in that situation. Now, a few months ago, before the lockdown, we were talking in various homeless forums and things like that about actually, for example, on the bedding side of it, providing storage facilities for people who genuinely, you know, the sleeping bag or whatever they've got are their entire possessions. And yet we're talking about sweeping it all away in, you know, a very heavy-handed way. I think we really ought to think about how we actually deal with the problems that lead up to this and understand that. Fair enough, people who do beg in obviously an organised and professional way, and you find out that they've got an address and everything else like that, I think they need to be dealt with. But using a heavy-handed, clumsy method like this that has actually been ridiculed in the recent past, I think is the wrong way to go about it. And we really need to look at rationalising this. And I believe the original proposals, not this motion now, was trying to deal with the way forward. And personally, I couldn't see anything that anyone could argue against it. You can still deal with, you know, recurring problems in various ways, but I really think we need to get some humanity.
Thank you, Councillor Trent. Councillor Rigby, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've just got a couple of points to make on the amendment which is being proposed. The first one being, and Councillor Mellor touched upon it a little bit before, that we had discussed this previously, and he said, you know, we've come from a heartfelt point of view. And the parts which we want to take out or add back in, as the amendment is putting in, they are directly targeting one group, and that group is the most vulnerable. That is rough sleepers. And that is what the issue with the original PSPO is, where we are looking to leave in the 3, which is drinking alcohol in public, possession, supply or use of intoxicating substances, or behaviour which causes harassment, alarm and distress. Those ones can be applied to anyone. It is not looking at targeting people who are rough sleeping, who've fallen on hard times, anything like that. And if there is behaviour displayed from people who are rough sleepers or aggressive begging, which is the main problem, not the actual rough sleepers, it is the issues of people who are doing this as an income stream rather than support themselves when they fall in hard times, it can fall under that final point of causing alarm or distress. And I think that's what we've got to focus on. The original PSPO didn't work. What actually worked was the intervention of the teams who were going out and engaging with people and actually working towards getting people the help and the resources which they need to get themselves back on their feet. And that's what we should be focusing on. Councillor Bartlett, you said you cast your mind back to the bids when we had their presentations. I can cast my mind back further when we had presentations on rough sleeping, and we had the cross agencies coming in and St Mungo's speaking to us and the great work which they've been going out and doing. And that's really what we've got to focus on, and that's got to be the way which we're going to address the antisocial behaviour issues coming from people who are aggressive begging or rough sleeping in the towns, to get the details of the people who really need help. And then we can say to the public, look, we are putting the support out there for the people who need it. The other ones, they can then be targeted, whether it be by the police for illegal behaviours and things like that. We need to do what we can to support the people who need it, and then target the people who are taking advantage of situations, not just go out there and say, this is the PSPO, everyone can just stop doing that now, you know. And I think by I'm not going to be able to support the amendments, and the reason being is that we need to help these people, not target them and having that specific in. It is just targeting one select group of people, and it's just unfair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rigby. I have the last speaker on this, which is Councillor Brooke, please.
Fine. Thank you, Chair. I recollect that when this proposal first came, or the proposal when the PSPO was first introduced in Poole, I was totally opposed to it, and I seem to recollect that that during the consultation, virtually every single church group and local charity organisation which deals with homeless people were also opposed to it. It was very, very clear that the items that are wanted to be put back into the current recommendation were directed specifically at homeless people. And as Councillor Rigby has pointed out, many of the issues around aggressive begging are actually linked and tied in with antisocial behaviour and the statements about causing harm and anxiety. I'm not changing my views at all since the original PSPO was introduced. We have to support our homeless people. They're in an unfortunate position. And yes, if any of them do get involved in the antisocial behaviour elements, then yes, the PSPO would apply and should apply. But for the majority of those, it does not apply and should not apply. And therefore, there is no way in which I can support the motion that is being put forward and voted on now.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brooke, and thank you to all the members who have contributed to this discussion. No one else has indicated to speak, so we have a recommendation which has been proposed and duly seconded and debated. So I think I'll probably, because there's mixed views on this, so I will need to go to the vote. So if I can ask Mr. Harrod to please do the roll call to take votes, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I think it might just be worth Councillor Rampton, if she would just to summarise her, just to do a quick sum up on her motion, and then we can take the vote if that's appropriate.
Yep, that's fine. Councillor Rampton, would you like to just sum up on your recommendation, please?
Thank you, Chair. Forgive me because it's been quite a long day already, hasn't it? But I think what I was saying was that I recommended a motion which said that items A to G were the items which should be recommended to Cabinet for approval in the conurbation-wide PSPO consultation. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. So effectively in the recommendation, which I think is number 2, it says to go to BCP-wide consultation based on the PSPO in paragraph 11. So effectively paragraph 11 will now have A to G as opposed to A, B and C. I think that's quite clear. So members, are we clear what we're voting on? Okay, if we are, then Mr. Harrod, can I pass on to you to take the roll call, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So, Councillor Mark Anderson.
For.
Councillor Stephen Bartlett.
For.
Councillor Mike Brooke.
Against.
Councillor Bobby Dove.
For.
Councillor Millie Earl.
Against.
Councillor LJ Evans.
Against.
Councillor George Farquhar.
Against, and I'd like my vote recorded, please.
Councillor Lawrence Fair.
For.
Councillor Mike Green.
Not participating.
Councillor Nicola Green, the same again.
Thank you, Chairman. I've taken no part in this item.
And Councillor Drew Mellor.
For.
Councillor Karen Rampton.
For.
Councillor Chris Rigby.
Against, and I'd also like my vote recorded, please.
And Councillor Tony Trent.
Against.
And Councillor May Haynes.
For.
Okay, Madam Chair, just confirm, out of a possible 13 votes on this item, there were 7 for and 6 against.
Thank you, Mr. Harrod. So the motion is carried, and that is a recommendation that will be put forward to Cabinet at their next meeting. Right, so I think that that concludes the discussion on this particular item. So we will move on to the next item, which is the scrutiny for transport and infrastructure related. So we have the DLEP item, which is the Ferndown Wallasdown to Poole Corridor Programme. I understand that we have Councillor Hadley to present this item. Yes, Councillor Hadley, you are there. If I can hand this over to you now to present, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is, there's lots of acronyms in here, which I'll try not to use. So this is the Ferndown Wallasdown to Poole link as part of the Dorset Local Enterprise Partnership proposals, and that itself is part of the Bournemouth International Growth Programme. So there's been money spent on things like the Blackwater Junction and on the Merley, reinforcing the Merley carriageway. So this is part of that overall programme of access to places like the airport, the Port of Poole, and the towns. And in particular, this bit is around the A348 Ringwood Road and the A3049 Wallasdown Road. As part of this, the priorities are around bus service improvements, cycling modal share, improving the walking routes, including multimodal travel, accessory improvements, and the effectiveness of those roads as strategic routes into the conurbation. The original full business case covered 3 specific areas. One was the Wallasdown Road, improvements on the Wallasdown Road as far as Bryant Road. The second was junction improvements at Seaview, and the third was the Ringwood Road between Alderney roundabout and the Mountbatten Arms or Miller and Carter as it's known now on that dual carriageway section. As part of having achieved the Transforming Cities funding, that includes the Ringwood Road route. So what we've negotiated, discussed with the Local Enterprise Partnership, is to transfer our efforts, not least because we have to spend the Local Enterprise Partnership monies by the end of this financial year. So to concentrate efforts on the Wallasdown Road cycle improvements and to pick up the other schemes through the Transforming Cities Fund. We had a meeting looking at the design with the ward councillors for the area on the 19th of May, and so they've seen the plans you've got. These are the outline plans, and this is seeking Cabinet's approval to go to full plans consultation and ideally building something before the end of March, which is when the funding runs out. So that's one part, and then the other part was the £502,000, £500, which is effectively transferring the money into the Blackwater scheme, which allows us to spend it in subsequent year.
Thank you, Councillor Hadley. I have Councillor Millie Earl, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really pleased to see these improvements to cycle infrastructure, particularly in the first part of that presentation from Councillor Hadley. This route's really important to me. I cycle to and from work in Ferndown when I go to the office, which I haven't been for ages. And I live in Newtown in Heaven, so it's quite often a route that I take, and sometimes Wallasdown Road, depending on where I'm heading as well. I do think there is room for further improvement on that route in particular. I've spoken to Councillor Hadley many times on Ringwood Road, but this is a really good start, and it will hopefully encourage more to take advantage of cycling rather than sitting in the queues on Wallasdown Road and Ringwood Road. I have a couple of questions though. On the plans for Wallasdown Road, am I right in thinking that the cyclists will have priority over vehicles exiting and entering from side roads and businesses from Wallasdown Road, so that the cyclists can carry on through, not have to stop for side roads, because that's a real bugbear of mine. And my second point is more of a comment and an ask, really. I love that we have the plans for Wallasdown Road, and they are really exciting, but I'm eager to see the plans for Seaview and Ringwood Road and the changes between the Mountbatten Arms and Alderney roundabouts. I'm assuming that ward councillors as stakeholders will be involved in the process before the final plans are approved. Thank you.
Can I respond to that, Chair?
Yes, Councillor Hadley, go ahead.
Yeah, so in terms of the side roads, the treatment is continuous pavement. So particularly for people walking, that they will be able to walk straight across. We have there's what's known as the Manchester zebra crossing. So there is a discussion nationally around how we can get to zebra crossings that don't need Belisha beacons, which reduces the cost of them very significantly. But the intention, the reason that Manchester are pushing for them so hard, is to enable people at the junctions to be able to cross over straight away, which is what the Highway Code says, and indeed it's part of the cycling walking improvement strategy. Sorry, the national cycling strategy. There's so many different strategies coming out at the moment, to enable that movement. That effectively, if you're turning off of a road, then you must give way to pedestrians and cyclists on that route. So yes, the cycle route will be next to the pavement and have priority. In terms of Seaview and Ringwood Road, as I said, those are deferred to the Transforming Cities Fund route. That's a 3-year programme. We are now started on that, and there has been some initial work on the drawings. It's been slightly slowed because of the work actually around the emergency active travel funds, and obviously this one's a priority because we want to get it through this financial year. So yes, there definitely will be meetings with ward councillors as an early opportunity to talk about the outline plans and to work through the detail of those. The other part, I suppose, that's relevant to that is the new National Cycling Strategy also includes an infrastructure guide which lays the foundation for how they should be. So where on Ringwood Road at the moment you have a cycle lane on the pavement shared with pedestrians and trees, which take up everything but a very small gap in some places. That's not going to be signed off as acceptable infrastructure by the national guidance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is that do you have any supplementary, Councillor Earl? You're fine.
That's fine. The only thing from the last meeting was Councillor Fear's suggestion about having more video and meeting briefings rather than just doing it by email, and I actually really like that idea because it saves me having to type out long emails in response to plans. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, I have Councillor Brooke next, please. Oh, Councillor Brooke, you all right?
Yes, it's just the getting the camera working. Yeah, I thoroughly welcome this scheme. But just a word of caution and a request to the portfolio holder. Councillor Earl made reference to the continuous pavements and cycleways and would they be in place. The response was yes, but I hope that when that is done, they will be done correctly with the pavements being continuous and not dropping down to road level. The Dunyeats Road scheme, which is potentially a very good scheme, has two very significant faults in it. One is that the pavement isn't actually continuous because the work was done not to plan. The continuous pavements and the bumps as they were not done. And secondly, it is absolutely vital that the visibility displays at the junctions are really, really good. We're faced in Broadstone with visibility displays that really require halt signs rather than the slow signs, and it is absolutely critical. That's absolutely critical if you're regarding this as not only priority for cyclists and pedestrians, but a safety issue as well. So yes, I thoroughly recommend the scheme and we'll be supporting it, but it does need to be done properly and effectively, not half-cocked, as it were. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brooke. Councillor Hadley, did you want to make any comments? Otherwise, I will go on to the next speaker.
That's absolutely fine. Thank you. No, I note those things.
Councillor Mike Green, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and apologies because I lost sound while Councillor Hadley was speaking and for a little after that when I think it's Councillor Earl. So if I say something even more stupid than usual, please forgive me on this one. It looks to me as though there's a bit of a shift in funding because of TCF, which is welcomed. The big programme was going on through DLEP before when we had the predecessor authorities, and it's continued through. It seems seamlessly into the new authorities, which is very welcome. These are schemes that we would for some time have liked to have had coming forward, and I'm very glad to see that that they are. I only got in part when Councillor Brooks was speaking and just part of Councillor Earl, so I assume that the question about that I had about what exactly was going on in Wallisdown Road, I couldn't quite see it, was to have the continuous pavements, which I think, as I can see Millie nodding, so that's good. And my question was going to be that are we ensuring that there is no further or that there is no increase in congestion or in journey times on Wallisdown Road? If the answer is that it's continuous pavements going in and that the decent cycle lanes are there, then I don't see that would disadvantage the people driving in their cars at all. It would give advantage to cyclists, which is very welcome on that road. So if I've got it right, I think I would be supportive of everything that's in this paper.
Can I respond to that?
Yes, Councillor Hadley.
Thank you. Yes, no, that's really helpful, Councillor Green. I think that there is discussion about whether there are one or two of the side roads that could be closed, because obviously part of the problem in terms of the knock-on effect or congestion is people waiting to turn right, and that obviously locks up the carriageway. So I think there has been discussion about whether, particularly by the at the Wallisdown end, there's a couple of side roads which are used as a bit of a way to get around the Wallisdown crossroads, and there's discussion about how those might look, and that will be part of the detailed work that we need to do with ward councillors as part of working up the scheme. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Green, you wish to come back?
Thank you. Yes. If there are to be some roads blocked off or some turns, I very much appreciate that it should be handled with through ward councillors. And unlike in the previous meeting, I think what we're talking about here is something that is that looks as though it is well balanced. And if that means that there is a small disadvantage to cars that need to go a slightly longer way around to get into a few side roads that are only used for rat running, against a significant advantage to cyclists of having this continuous route. Again, I think on this one, the balance tips very significantly towards the proposed scheme. So again, I would say that subject to the responses of local ward councillors, who will probably know an awful lot better than I will, but my inclination is still to be very supportive of that.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I have Councillor Farquhar next, please. Councillor Farquhar.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just urge all board members just to reflect, particularly on the subject of side road closures, particularly when they're talking to their residents. And I'd just like people to reflect that last week I drove past the flowers in memorial of the road traffic collision on a side road leading onto the Wallace Down Road, which sadly was the death of a young motorcyclist. So I would ask that we reflect as a board and we reflect as councillors that the decisions that we make have a very, very serious effect upon people's tolerance when they're using the roads. And one of the things which I've seen out of this discussion around road closures, etc., is a lot of anger from road users. And I don't think we need to be adding any more to that. And I'd just like us all to pause and reflect just for a moment, if you please, Chair, on the tragic death of a young motorcyclist on a surge road leading on to Wallace Down Road.
Not exactly relevant to this particular item, but we'll pause for a few seconds. Right, we'll go on to the next speaker. Councillor Fear, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's slightly going on from what Councillor Green was saying just a minute ago. You know, kind of it's a bit of day and night looking at this paper now compared to others today. But overall, I think it's a very good paper. Definitely, it's been encouraging for Councillor Hadley to say that all ward councillors and neighbouring ward councillors, because it's around that area. I have a hell of a lot of residents that are impacted through there, going back since 2015 when I came on the preceding council. So it's really good, I think, what's in here most of all, and the consultation, and obviously not just with the ward councillors, but getting that message out there and explaining what will be happening is crucial, I think, and hopefully it will bring some much needed improvements. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fear. Members, there's no one else indicating to speak, but I think with the three speakers, so Councillor Earl, Councillor Mike Green and Councillor Fear, there was the request that early involvement of ward councillors, and indeed following on from a previous item, perhaps involvement of ward councillors in adjacent wards on the progress of the scheme and the plans is something that I think is desirable. So did you want to make that a formal recommendation, members, or did you just want that as a comment to be taken to Cabinet? And the portfolio holder is actually present, and I'm sure he's actually taken note of that. So members, did you want to make a formal recommendation, or are you happy for the portfolio holder to have just made a note to do just that? Councillor Hadley, are you? Yeah, sorry. Yes, Councillor Green.
Chair, I would be happy if Councillor Hadley just gave that assurance to us.
Yes, okay. Councillor Hadley, are you content with that?
Absolutely. Well, ward councillors have already been engaged and very happy to take that suggestion.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Hadley. I have no one else indicating to speak, so thank you very much, Councillor Hadley. We will move on to the next item, which is, where are we? The environment related. So this is to do with the waste services policy.
I thought it was, sorry, I thought the next one was planning. I beg your pardon.
Chairman, it's item number 7, the parking supplementary planning document.
You're on mute.
My apologies, Councillor Phipps, you are quite right. I've got two different agendas in front of me. But yes, it is the planning related item. You are quite correct, which is to consider the Bournemouth Christchurch and Poole parking standards. So if I can hand over to you, please, Councillor Phipps, to present. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so this is a draft parking standards supplementary planning document. which sets out to harmonise previous documents across BCP so that we actually have consistency. Instead of 3 documents, we have 1. It has already been extensively discussed by a cross-party working group before being drafted, and Councillor Green has already mentioned that. The aim is to establish new local parking standards for residential and non-residential development schemes. All the tables in the document have been updated to match the new class uses which were recently published by the government. And the recommendation is to approve this. It's only a draft document at the moment, to go out to consultation, which will be for 4 weeks from the 14th of September. I have to say, I think it's quite a technical document, and we do expect it might be of more interest to perhaps developers than the general public, but it is open for full public consultation. Following consultation on the draft, the amended SPD will come back to Cabinet on the 16th of December with any amendments that have been made, and if agreed, it'll go to full council on the 5th of January 2021, hopefully to be adopted. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Phipps. I have no one indicating to speak. Does anyone wish to make any comments or ask? Yes. They're all coming in now. Councillor Mike Green, please.
Thank you, Chairman. As said earlier, I was part of this working group, and I thank Councillor Phipps and Councillor Hadley for inviting me onto it. So I won't be able to take part on the discussion as a board member, but I will on presenting the paper. I think that it is a very well balanced paper. It recognises that as we are moving forward with development and very harsh development targets we have as far as the number of homes that we will be building in the BCP area, it will become necessary to have parking which is appropriate for the location and for the type of property, and in particular in the concentrated town centres, where we are looking more at single people or young couples in areas that are very well connected by public service, public transport, which are easily cyclable, that there should no longer be a requirement to put in car parking spaces, effectively, in many cases, one per unit. And that's really the main change that's taking place in this one. And I think makes absolute sense, because we are finding that in those areas, people are very happy to be living without a car. One factor that has been brought up many times over the last few years is that there are roads which are already heavily congested with on-street parking, and the potential is that this could then push them, occupiers, to be putting their cars on the road. And I would point out that there is a significant section in the proposal which says that these would only be brought in, or the standards would only be brought in at the same time or after other changes in traffic regulation orders, potentially including controlled parking zones, to ensure that wouldn't happen. I think that's particularly important to recognise that this is only 50% of the total solution, which will enable people to have the right parking in the right places. At the same time, you'll see that there is a zoned approach with zones A, B, C and D, and different requirements in each one. And I would hope that during the consultation, if it is established, or if it's brought forward by people that maybe those zones need a little bit of adjustment, I'm sure that's something that will be listened to, and I would hope that it will be a major part of that consultation. And thank you to board members for looking at it.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I have Councillor Anderson, please, next.
Thank you, Chairman. I do have some comments on this, and I will, as normal, make my comments known to the officers and Councillor Phipps on this. Councillor Green has made one of my comments that I was very concerned about the zoning in Queen's Park, especially because I think we are in places considered to be a shopping area, but most of my residents have difficulty access the main bus routes because there's a Wessex Way that goes right down the side of my road, and the bus route is on the other side of that. So I will make my comments known about that to the officers in the consultation period.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. I have Councillor Bartlett next, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. First of all, I was very impressed with the strategy paper itself. Being a member of the planning board, I'm very used to looking at the supplementary planning document for parking. It seems to feature in most of our planning applications, and no doubt this one will in the future. But rather than go to any real detail about it, the overriding issue for me was the one that Councillor Green has just mentioned, and that is the fact that if you don't have a parking space for the property, well, you're going to put your car somewhere if you've got one, and of course most people do have one, and most families have one, if not two, or even three or four. It'd be interesting to see what the zonal approach does, and it's very difficult to make a judgment about this strategy without actually seeing, or this policy without actually understanding what those zonal policies are going to be. So I think I'll just leave it at that, and the opportunity obviously is during the consultation period to look at some of those issues. Just one specific thing I noted in the paper, and that was with the on-street parking assessment that is required if you submit a planning application and you don't meet the criteria under the supplementary planning document. In the main text of the report, it says the council asks for this at its discretion, but when you actually look at the appendix, it actually says you shall submit this with your planning application. So there's a slight contradiction there. Personally, I'd like to see any application that doesn't conform to these standards, because they're going to be lower in some places, depending on how you look at it, lower, higher. But if it doesn't conform, I think, the parking assessment should be carried out. It's going to be much more critical to do that in the future to make sure we understand the impact on on-street parking. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. I have Councillor Brooke next, please.
Fine. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a couple of things. It's an excellent report. It's an excellent strategy or document. I'm fully supportive of it. I think it's very detailed, very explicit, and therefore anyone referring to it should be very, very clear what is acceptable and what isn't. However, two issues really, or two thoughts. We have recently had a significant change to the planning regulations in terms of what is, excuse me, what is and what isn't permitted development. Under the new permitted development regulations, many of the requirements that would be in a normal planning application are now required under what's called prior approval. Now, in the prior approval, it does make reference to a series of requirements that have got to be in that application, one of which is reference to impacts on transport and highways. But nowhere in this document or in the regulations is there specific reference to how the SPD actually relates to the new regulations, especially in terms of parking. And I would like assurances from the portfolio holder that when a prior application comes in, the parking standards can be dealt with under the transport and highways requirement. That's the first question. And the second question, table 30, under the sui generis items, there's reference to large houses of multiple occupancy. And it makes reference, and that means any multiple occupancy where there are more than 6 rooms for occupation. And it says there, cars, staff and visitors. It makes no reference to residents, and it just references 1 per HMO. Now, we are currently facing an application for an HMO for 15 beds. And if there's no reference, or there's only 1 parking space requirement, that's going to potentially put 14 cars elsewhere. So okay. I'm a little bit concerned about that. And could also the portfolio holder just clarify that where it says staff and visitors, that is actually an error, and it should say residents and visitors, as it did in the normal HMOs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brooke. Councillor Phipps, you're on mute at the minute, Councillor Phipps.
Sorry, that happened to me before as well. Yeah, we can confirm that staff and residents is an error, so I would confirm that, and we will sort that one out. I was going to reply to Councillor Bartlett earlier as well, but I was on mute at the time, I think, so I'll come to that as well. As far as your question about the new permitted development regulations, I can confirm that an application for prior approval does require that the planning authority considers transport and highway impacts on the development, and we will consider parking in the same way as we would under a formal planning application. And it is one of the areas where we consider these type of things, and if they're going to lead to highway dangers or traffic congestion or something like that, we can refuse prior approvals on highway matters. So I just would confirm that. I think that's what you were assuming, and you asked for some confirmation on it, so I hope that gives you that. As I was on mute before, I would just like to come back to Councillor Bartlett's point, where he mentioned about the controlled parking zones, and I just wanted to confirm that it's not just about the things we'll be doing other than reducing parking in certain areas. Is a whole raft of issues, that such as there are zones, yes, and we're asking for comments, and if, as Councillor Anderson said, he has an issue, please put the comments into the consultation, because that is what this is all about. But there are also going to be sort of other means, like, and it's a whole package really, like area-specific residence parking zones, which cover a bit of a wider area, or time-related parking and TROs. It's like a whole raft of things really to bring the package together to try and make it work. So, and also I think Councillor Bartlett also noted an error, which I think hopefully has been picked up by officers, and thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Phipps. I do not have anyone else indicating to speak. Anyone else? No? Okay. So the recommendation is for this item to actually go out to consultation. So as Councillor Phipps has actually indicated, that I think members, if you want to make your views known, particularly, sorry, Councillor Hadley, do you want to come in now, please?
I'm sorry, Chair. It's ever such a short point. I'm sorry, I was late. It was just in relation to car clubs. So one of the things that we have tried to build into this is to try and encourage the use of car clubs, and again, that's about sharing cars rather than having lots of cars parked that are not in use. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hadley. So I was just going to say that there's no one else indicating to speak. So when the consultation is live, is to encourage members to respond, particularly if you've got specific issues within your ward. So no one else has any other comments. So I thank Councillor Phipps and Councillor Hadley for this item, and I'll move on to the next item, which is, as I said before, scrutiny of the environment related items. So it's the waste services policy going forward. We have Councillor Rice to present, and I understand, members, that Councillor Bartlett would also like to speak on this. So if members are happy for me to invite Councillor Rice to present and then invite Councillor Bartlett to speak before I open it out to debate. Councillor Rice, please.
Hello. Yep. You can all hear me okay. Great. Well, we're getting through the meeting. So we are getting to the this waste paper. Let me just get up my notes. Okay. So this is a broad-ranging bin paper. There's been an awful lot of work that's been put into this paper. Just to point out that, especially considering we're still in a global pandemic, and as all of our officers have, they have been working at unprecedented levels throughout this lockdown, followed by the hot summer weather.
Sorry, Councillor Rice, can I just interrupt 1 second? Okay, it's all right. It's just I had a message to say recording has stopped, but it's resumed, so sorry. Carry on.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, it was really just to highlight thank you to the officers for getting this paper through and, well, bringing this paper to this stage and all the work that they've put into it, because our officers in the waste area have just been working flat out. We've taken into account comments from last year's bin paper. We've had a general meeting with Councillor Mark Anderson, and I'm also really pleased that we were able to have so many councillors attend the member briefing last week. So it has been looked at in detail and the reasoning behind it understood, but obviously there are 400,000 residents that all have a view on how to do rubbish collections and types of bins and frequency, and so of course do our 74 ward councillors. So this is another opportunity to clarify the points and add to the paper during this meeting. There's a lot of technical information in this paper, so kindly Ian Pulteney is available to assist if needed. So thank you very much, and I will open it up for questions.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Councillor Bartlett, yes, you are there. Councillor Bartlett, you have some points you wish to raise. Would you like to raise them now, please? Councillor Bartlett, are you there? Okay, what I'll do is I'll move on to the first person that's indicated they want to speak. Councillor Anderson?
Sorry, Chair, I'm back.
You are there, Yes, go ahead, please, Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you. I just wanted to make some points, if I'm allowed to read out what I've written down on this.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, I really wanted to ask that we possibly can follow the existing pool system of bins, because they're working really well. We use black for refuse, blue for recycling and green for garden waste. Many residents have actually had the bins for many years, so they actually last quite a long time. So in that case, it wouldn't involve changing bins for anybody in pool. At the moment, we have refuse bins of 180 litres and 140 litres. And our blue bins are 240 or 140, and the green bin is 240. My reasons for this really are that residents can have a bin size according to what they need, what they can handle, and what they can store at their property, because not everybody has got a huge property for storage. The colours are easily identifiable, especially if you have a bin of full colour, not just the lid. Many bins in pool are still intact from 2004 and 2011, and disposing of existing bins could be wasteful and costly. So some bins could be redesignated in areas. For example, Christchurch has got the black bin with a green lid, which they use for recycling, which possibly could be redesignated for garden waste. The Bournemouth 240 litre black bin used for recycling could be designated for refuse for larger households. You could retain the black refuse bins across the whole conurbation, and people just request if they need a different size. And And there is a possibility that the Christchurch black bin with the brown lid could even be sold to Dorset Council, because they actually use a bin of that colour. And then the charges, I feel this is one of the things I've been watching for years as a resident. Charges in Poole have actually gone up every year since 2016. We paid £37.55 for our green bin. It's now charged at £46. I feel if it goes up and up, residents will reach the decision that it's not cost effective to have a green bin, and they'll either take the debris to the tip in their own car, or they'll fly tip, or they'll reduce the greenness of their garden, which wouldn't help people or plants or nature. And I think the charge for the refuse and recycling shouldn't be allowed, because it should be a core function of council, which should be allowed for under the council tax. So that's really is my picture of what could happen, which isn't really big changes, but I feel, maybe that can be considered.
Thank you very much for your contribution, Councillor Bartlett. Members, I will now move on to members of the committee. Unless Councillor Rice, you wish to come back on some of the points that Councillor Bartlett has raised, or you can tend to move on.
Thank you, Chair. It was just to say that these reasons were raised last week, so thank you. And I know officers have thought about all of them as well. And I suppose the main point, just to clarify about the existing bins in Poole. So we'll only be replacing the recycling and refuse ones as they break with different ones. So it's not a rollout of changes for those. So just to make sure that you understood that, sort of, because we won't have many bins being changed in Poole to begin with. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'll move on to the board members now. Councillor Anderson, please.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I'd like to thank the Rice and the officers for the presentation they gave me. It was very useful, gave me some questions to think on. I do have two issues that I didn't think about when I discussed it with them. And these are, one involves the WEEE collections. I'm disappointed that we are trying to push for more recycling, and yet we are going to get rid of the WEEE collections. And I very much like to see the WEEE collections continuing. I think if it's so successful, we should look at increasing it rather than getting rid of it. And the second one is, it's more a series of questions which I was pondering over, and that's, we're talking about placing all the 140 bins in Bournemouth and Christchurch with 180 bins, and we're talking about getting rid of the 140 bins that are used in Bournemouth for green waste and replacing them with 2 bins. So would it not be a useful idea to look at replacing the 180 bins in Poole with the 140 bins that are now surplus to requirement from the green waste? And in particular, we are actually spending money to do a complete rollout on green waste. I don't necessarily expect an answer straight away, but I would like the officers, and if she could, the portfolio holder, to consider that and maybe look into that. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, any more points, Councillor Anderson? That's it. Councillor Wright,
I'm happy to respond. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, I can completely understand your concerns about the WEEE collection. I haven't got any details about how successful it is. I know that the staff just haven't been content with the service from an operational point of view and staffing point of view. I don't know whether they would deem it as successful or not. So we could certainly get that information for you in terms of the quantity of waste electrical goods that they pick up. We did discuss it at the briefing last week, and there were some ideas around explaining which charity shops take them back, and where there are bins in supermarkets that take waste electrical goods still, then to sort of make public aware of where those are accessible. But it's and there is also some legislative changes as well regarding the requirements for producers, so the manufacturers and the sellers of the waste electrical goods, to take more responsibility over their products that they're producing and how they design them. So like, I agree, it would be great to be able to pick these all up, but it's not a service that was running efficiently. The staff weren't happy with it, and we just weren't particularly happy to continue it. On the bins, I think your question was around the 180 litre bins. Actually, I got confused whilst you were asking the question. I thought I had it, and now I haven't. My notes aren't good enough. I'm sure Ian will have noted it down, and I can listen it back to it on the recording, and I'll make sure that they're thinking about that. But basically about sort of, whilst we're replacing some bins and got different sized bins elsewhere, then could we make use of the ones? So yeah, I will check that we've considered that.
That is absolutely correct. It's just we're going to have a surplus of 140 litre bins, and it seems fairly strange, should we say. I'm sure the officers may have thought about it, but yeah, if we are going to purchase 240 litre bins for Bournemouth, which means we're going to have a large number of 140 litre bins surplus to requirements in Bournemouth, would it not be easier and cheaper to do a roll out of these 140 bins in Poole rather than do a complete a bump in Christchurch, which is a bigger area, with 180 litre bins, sorry.
Yeah, I don't know if Ian wants to come in on that, if he's around at the moment, specifically, but we can. It maybe requires a little bit more.
I think perhaps if you want to take that away.
Yeah, it's quite late, isn't it? Okay, that's fine.
And give that due consideration. Because I have quite a lot of people wanting to speak, so I have Councillor Trent next, please.
Yeah, I have a basic question to start off with, which basically responds to the question that Councillor Bartlett raised earlier on, and that's that what is the cost difference if you're replacing a bin between a black one with a coloured lid or one that's all one colour? Because like Councillor Bartlett, I do think that actually having the 3 different coloured bins works quite well. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it. One of the things that's confusing me about this report is, are we actually talking about, I know recycling and refuse bins are going to be replaced as and when, but are we talking about actually removing the garden waste bins in Bournemouth and replacing them with larger ones at a cost? Because I would have thought that would have been up to the individual householder if they want it removed, because I do agree with the fairness thing that if they are paying the same for a green bin than you're paying in Poole, then they should be entitled to the same size bin. But if they are happy with the smaller bin, an individual householder is happy with the smaller bin, and they want to keep that smaller bin, albeit that they're paying the same as they would be for a larger bin, then what is the problem? Because you know, it seems to me that we are replacing a lot of bins, and quite frankly, I think the bin sizes that are being employed at the moment within Poole, I find they work perfectly well. And as I say, I'm struggling to make sense of that third point, because I don't quite know what's being proposed.
Okay, so your first question was about coloured bins and whether how much extra it costs. I don't know how much extra it costs, but I think the main point of your question was about could we not have fully coloured bins for recycling, so that it makes it easier for residents to distinguish which bin is which, like we have it currently in Poole. So my understanding around that is that now that the three towns have come together and we're running the services all together, in terms of efficiencies for being able to switch bins, for collections, for ordering of bins, delivery of new bins, it is easier to have one colour of bin with a different coloured lid. And so it's not so much, I don't think it's so much the cost of a coloured bin as such, it's the operational aspect of having different coloured bins that makes it preferable from the service point of view to change it. From the resident point of view, my understanding is that they haven't found that not having the full different coloured bin makes a difference to residents in general. They haven't had many complaints about that where it's already existing in Christchurch, for example. So I know this was raised last week, and so the officers are aware to sort of, if it gets the go-ahead and we do get that change, to sort of be aware of that, but they haven't experienced it elsewhere, and it's not something that commonly comes up nationally as an issue. And I know that nationally there is a move to have the consistent body colour and then a different coloured lid. And your third question, can you just repeat it?
I don't think, Councillor Trent, there wasn't really a third question, was there?
Well, it was basically, is it, and I need clarification on this, are we actually talking about replacing the 140 litre garden waste bins in Bournemouth, whether people want it or not? As I say, I'm happy for them to be replaced if people want it in the name of fairness, because you are paying for emptying the same size bin that's being emptied in Poole. But are we replacing it regardless?
Yeah, I did check on that today. So if residents are really keen to keep their 140 litre bin for their green waste, then they will be able to do so in Bournemouth until it breaks. So if they look after it, then as long as it's looked after and survives, then they can keep it for as long as they need, but they will have to pay the normal equal rate that everybody else is paying. But we expect that there won't be many of them, because we've this is why this change is happening, because operationally, again, in Poole we have 240 litre bins, so residents are fine with that. In Bournemouth, we've found that there has been quite a lot of complaints because it's only 140 litre bins. When it comes to green waste, that is then quite difficult to put in, and people are squishing it down, and then it doesn't come out when it's tipped up, for example. So operationally and resident requests, that is why we think there'll be sort of quite good uptake of the 240 litre bins in Bournemouth. But residents can keep the 140 litre bin if they wish to.
Just to say that personally, I think the 240 litre bin is the only practical size really in the garden, even though some weeks don't fill it, but
Yeah.
Okay. I need to move on because we have a lot of people wanting to speak. Councillor Rampton, please, next.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can I please have a point of clarification and then come back straight away with my question?
Yes.
So the clarification I'm seeking is, are we actually suggesting that green bins in Bournemouth will be replaced with 240 litres, but the cost for everybody across the conurbation will be £55 if that happens?
No, the cost will be £49. So £3 increase, I think, is always from £46 or £47 to £49. But £55 is for replacement green bins if they get damaged in any reason. So that's not sort of very common.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
No. Chair, I thought I read in the report that it was £55 I can't find the actual paragraph now.
There's a section that says charges for bins, bags, and in there it says the garden waste bins will be £55, but that's for a replacement bin. It's not for the actual service.
Okay.
And
Right.
so yeah, it's
Okay.
on page. It's right at the beginning of page 108. The garden waste price for 2021 will be £49 per bin.
For 2021.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. Yeah, Chair, if I can just come back.
Yes, certainly.
I have a lot of sympathy with what Councillor Bartlett was saying, and she has some really good ideas. I do remember standing up in council when we talked about the inequity of the garden waste system and the fact that in my ward we have residents in Poole paying the same amount for a 240 litre as residents in Bournemouth are paying for a 140 litre bin. And I had a couple of suggestions at that point for the portfolio holder, which was basically to reduce the price that Bournemouth residents were paying until it could be sorted out. What I didn't expect was that actually the price would shoot up to this extent and right across the conurbation as well. And I think it's extraordinary to do that, because it's completely out of order to be doing that, to claw back. In the interest of being equitable, to claw back this money by putting the prices up for absolutely everybody. And I find it very difficult to understand. So perhaps the portfolio holder could elaborate. Thank you.
Councillor Ram, do you have another question, or is that your question? Just that? Because I'm just in the interest of time. If you had a second question.
No, that's my question.
That's your question. Thank you. Councillor Rice?
Yes, I'm just wondering if Ian can confirm the price for this year. I think it was about £46. I don't know if Ian's able to come in on that.
Mr. Pulteney, are you? Yes, I can see you. Are you able to provide that information?
Yeah, so the price varies across the conurbation. At the moment, there is a separate price for Bournemouth, which is, I think, around £46, whereas in Poole and Christchurch, it's slightly higher, and that reflects the current situation with regards to the fact that Bournemouth and Christchurch both have 240 litre bins.
Yeah, so we're not increasing the price very much. So it's a maximum of £46, and it's increasing to £49. So I don't know if that helps clarify it for you, Councillor Rampton. It's not a huge ramp.
Councillor Rampton, did you want to come back, or?
Thank you, Chair. Having said that, I didn't want to. I'm just looking at B, the charge for bins. If 240 litre garden waste bins are agreed as standard, this price would increase to £55. So if the portfolio is saying, the holder is saying that that's only for replacement, I don't think the report makes that very clear.
Sorry, can you just go back to the bit that you were reading?
Yeah, so B on page, bear with me, on page 108, B, charges, so harmonisation of charges. If 240 litre garden waste bins are agreed as standard, this price would increase to £55.
Yeah, I can like, there's a lot in this paper, so I can see where you're coming from. But the title charges for bins, bags is separate from the garden waste service charge. I can ask, yes. So I can see where the confusion is coming from, but I can clarify that under the charges for bins, bags, that is for replacement bins, bags, not for the service. So it's not.
Councillor Rampton, I think what Councillor Rice is saying is that the £45 and £55 is actually referring to the price for a physical bin, not the collection service.
Correct.
Yeah.
Perhaps the report could be clearer.
I agree. It can be confusing if you're reading it and not realising that that's what it was referring to. Right. Are you happy for me to move on, Councillor Rampton?
May I just make one last point,
Yeah,
Chair?
just one point, yeah.
I'm aware that we're running out of time. There was a suggestion by somebody, by my lovely colleague, that perhaps the 180 bins could be replaced with 140 to use up the surplus. And can I just say, no way, please, because pool residents would not be very happy with that. So could that idea please be discounted? Thank you.
Okay, on that note, I'll move on to the next speaker, which is Councillor Rigby, please.
Thank you, Chair. This has almost come around to what I wanted to talk about, actually, with the cost of the replacement bins to the residents. I've got a couple of recommendations or amendments, if I can do so. When it comes to replacement of bins at the moment, obviously that comes down on the resident to pay for them if they are damaged, and those costs are whatever they will be after the harmonisation takes place. But as far as I'm aware, all of the bin lorries have CCTV on them, and a lot of the residents claim that the bins were damaged by the council during collections and things like that. So the first recommendation I'd like to make is that when we look at bin replacements, if there's a question by the residents of if the council's damaged it, can a senior officer review that footage to make the decision on whether it was the council or the resident who should be paying for the replacement bin? And the second thing that I'd like to do, and talking about waste, it seems that we should try and limit waste as much as we possibly can do. Most of the replacements and most of the damaged bins that I see or I get asked about and things like that, it's always just damage to the lids. Could we possibly look at, rather than replacing a bin, having a separate cost for just replacing the lids on the bins, which should stop the waste of the whole bin being replaced and also hopefully bring down the costs as well to the residents?
Thank you for that, Councillor Rigby. If you're putting them as proposals, do you have a seconder?
Yes, I'd like to propose those both, please. And if someone would like to second, that'd be nice.
We're not getting anyone wishing to second or rushing to second. You raised some very... Sorry.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say I'm happy to second, but I think George got in just before me.
Try.
Sorry, who wishes to second this?
It's been seconded by Councillor Farquhar already, and Councillor Earl seconded.
It's just that you didn't put it on the chat bar. I just heard some noise in the background. Okay, so you've got a proposal, which is basically to review CCTV footage if someone reports a damaged bin, damaged by the collection vehicle, and then the other one was to do with, can we just replace lids as opposed to bins if that's an entire bin, because it may be cheaper. So I think what I would like is probably clarification from the officer as to the practicalities of reviewing the CCTV footage, plus what the cost would be to actually send someone to replace a broken lid. If I don't know, Mr. Pulteney, would you be able to help?
Yes, of course, Chair. So in the case of the broken lid, we're already doing that where it's practically possible to do so. Unfortunately, some of the bins out on the streets are somewhat 20 years old, so that over time there's been a variety of different manufacturers who've provided us with bins. So where it's practical to do so, we would replace the lid, but in some instances it's just not possible. They're no longer manufactured in the same way. So that hopefully takes care of that one. In terms of the reviewing, the crews are pretty honest, to be fair. If they are responsible for the damage to a bin, it usually is a case that the bin itself has gone into the back of the truck, and they record that on their daily worksheets, and so we would have a record of that. Occasionally it could be a matter of contention, and yes, we do have the access to CCTV to review it if it gets to that stage. I wouldn't recommend that we review every single case on that basis, because some of them will be very clear cut. But if more likely the damage is if somebody's overloaded the bin and it's gone on the bin lift and it snaps, and that's where the issue is more likely to be, where the CCTV is of use.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Pockney. Councillor Rigby, it appears that which one is it? The second recommendation you made about the bin lid, that already happened. So do you still wish to proceed with it?
Yeah, I'd like to see it reflected in the report if that's possible, just so we've got it in black and white.
Okay, right. So members, we've got 2 recommendations. Who wishes to speak on these recommendations? Can you please indicate?
Excuse me, Chair. I have seconded and I've done an RTS, and I see there's a list wishing to speak on these recommendations.
Okay, would you like, let me just see, Councillor Bartlett, please. You're the first one to indicate after the proposal.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've got issues about these charges for replacement bins, particularly, and it's not stated actually on the chart, but there are occasions when they go missing, and that's not reflected in these charges. Now,
actually, sorry, Councillor Bartlett, I was actually calling for people to speak on the proposal that.
Yes, I am. Yes, I'm coming.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, I am. Yeah, because it also applies to the damages and broken damaged bins. And it's interesting, the officer just said some of these bins are 20 years old. Well, the chances are they're getting pretty worn out, and if they need to be replaced, I think it's pretty unreasonable that a resident should be expected to pay for them. I think what you need to understand, these bins, and this was confirmed at our meeting the other day, belong to the council. Therefore, if they are damaged or worn out, then surely it's right that the owner of these bins should pay for their repair. Now, if, for example, there is negligence which can be proven against the tenant, then yes, of course, the charge should be applied. But we must remember that these bins belong to the council. If they're worn out or broken, then the cost of that should be covered from within the service charge. And in particular, if they are stolen off the street, which happens quite frequently, then is it reasonable when a tenant is not, or a resident has not acted unreasonably, that they should cover the charge for it? And just the last point on the video camera, I've had instances in my ward where the collection lorries video doesn't work, and 2 bins were actually gobbled up by the refuse lorry, and there was a huge debate that went on for weeks before we could actually get some bins supplied back to the residents, because their contention that the bins went into the lorry was not believed, you know, because residents are actually always quite honest as well about these things. So, you know, I've got real issues. I don't think those charges for replacement should be applied ever, regardless of the extent of the damage, if it's just the lid or whatever. They should be covered by the service charge, unless, as I said, that there is obvious evidence of negligence on behalf of the resident who's got them under their custody. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Bartlett. I've got Councillor Farquhar, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak on this one. It's an interesting point that Councillor Bartlett raises, and in the workshop, who owns the bins actually was a subject which came up, and it may be an idea that that's actually clarified within the paper, because obviously we have 3 towns coming together and 3 towns work in a very different way. I can't see in my notes immediately what the answers from the officers were on that. On the subject of breakages and that residents should never be charged for breakages, and that CCTV cameras are not necessarily working, I'll share my own experience. As it says in the report, Bournemouth bins are actually very old. I myself, with my recycling bin, that had a breakage, and the date on that bin was in the last century. In fact, in the 80s was the date on that particular bin. The breakage on that was actually to the handle and to the lid itself. My concern here not to charge for breakages of bins is because in some of the towns there will be an increased capacity offered on the bins. Consequently, there is a temptation, if you want to upgrade early on your bin, where you have a policy whereby you only replace on breakages when the bin wears out, there may well be a temptation by users to accidentally break their bin so that they get a larger shiny new one. So my question really to the portfolio holder is, who owns the bins, and is the bins which are being replaced on breakage, are the residents being charged for that? And if so, then I certainly support the recommendation by Councillor Rigby.
Councillor Rice?
Okay. So, you're right, this did come up in the briefing last week. So under the proposals, if your bin breaks and you have to pay for a replacement, then that bin does become yours. And so just the same as a fridge in your property, the bin is your own property. And if you came to sell your house, just like your fridge, you would come to an arrangement as to whether you wanted to leave the bin there or not. That does not apply to the green bin service, because those bins are always part of the service rather than being purchased by the household owner. George points out the query of the temptation to accidentally break the bin, and that is a concern from officers in their experience. And it would be a particular issue if it meant that they were gaining additional capacity. Was that all the points? The other thing about charging for bins, on Steve Bartlett's point, is that I can see his point of view, definitely, but there's also the point of view that if you are responsible for it and there's a cost associated with it, then that does encourage more responsibility with it. But in terms of sort of debates about whether a lorry bin swallows up bins or not, there is still the usual discretion that officers would be able to apply in those situations. George, was there something? Sorry, Councillor George Parker, was there something else that you added on at the end there that I haven't covered?
No, the only thing which I think perhaps, Felicity, that you might have missed is that it might be an idea within the paper to include to define that, in that if somebody purchases a bin, it then becomes their property. And
by the ownership, yeah.
And I think in the briefing that you had, then the question of the officers was: is there a cost and is there an overhead to administrating who owns a bin and who actually uses a bin from the previous administrations?
Yeah, we don't think that would be an issue, because when going forwards, as people purchase bins, that would just be recorded centrally on that last point. May, you're on. Sorry, Councillor May Haynes, you're on.
Councillor Mike Green, did you want to speak?
Yeah, yes, Chairman, I did, but it's not on this particular proposal. I put my right to speak, my request to speak before Councillor Rigby made his.
Councillor Bartlett, you've put an RTS again, but you've spoken. Is that just a duplication?
I did want to speak, Chair, before the proposal was made. You then asked if anyone wanted to speak to the proposal, so I had to put it in again, but it's basically to cover the same points. Thank you.
Okay, does anyone else, Councillor Earl, did you want to speak on the proposal or not? Because you did say you wanted to second it, although you've been picked to the post.
No, that's all right. It was purely to second, and I'm okay not to speak for it.
Okay, so does anyone else wish to speak on the recommendation which has been proposed and duly seconded? If not, I will go to the vote on that. No? Okay, so I think Mr. Harrod, if I go to Councillor Rigby to sum up, and then can you please then do the roll call to take the vote? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Haynes. I think I've said everything which I want to. Yes, so as long as the proposals are clear to everyone, then I'm happy to go with what's already been said in the debate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think
Repeat the motion, please.
right. So I think the proposal is that. Can someone please? Can you please mute because there's a lot of echoing. Thank you. The proposal is that if someone is claiming that the council broke the bin, that CCTV footage that comes with the collection vehicle is reviewed to ensure that that is indeed the case. And then the other recommendation is if a bin is broken, but it's just the lid that's broken, that the lid should be replaced and not the whole bin. So that those are the two recommendations which we will now go to the vote on.
Okay,
So
thank you.
Mr. Harrod, please.
Thank you, Chair. So Councillor May.
Oh, you're coming to me first. I'm abstaining.
Councillor Mark Anderson.
Against.
Councillor Stephen Bartlett.
Against.
Councillor Mike Brooke.
For.
Councillor Bobby Dove.
Against.
Councillor Millie Earl.
For.
Councillor LJ Evans.
For.
Councillor George Farquhar.
For.
Councillor Lawrence Fair.
Against.
Councillor Mike Green.
For.
Councillor Nicola Green.
Against.
Councillor Drew Mellor.
Against.
Councillor Karen Rampton.
Against.
Councillor Chris Rigby.
For.
And Councillor Tony Trent.
For.
Yes, thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. I have 7 votes for, 7 votes against, and 1 abstention.
Right, so I have to do casting vote.
Chair, weren't there 2 abstentions? I thought I heard 2 abstentions.
Mr. Harrod, were there 2 abstentions?
I have it marked as 1, but just the 1 abstention. I've had it confirmed by a colleague.
I think it is only 1 abstention, so if I have the casting vote, I will vote against then.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, so we now go back to the substantive. It's been a long discussion. A lot of people have expressed interest. So if I go back to the original list, I think the next person to speak on the substantive was Councillor Bartlett. Did you still wish to speak?
Yes, please, Chair. I would like to propose that the charges for repairs are 0, replacement for refuse bins, and replacement of garden waste bins for brokerage, either broken or damaged, not caused by resident negligence, is not charged.
Okay, thank you for that. Do you have a seconder for that? Yes, I think I've got Councillor Anderson who's happy to second. So we have another proposal, members. Who wishes to speak on the proposal, please?
I have a question.
Not normally allowed, but go ahead.
Well, it was just clarification, really. So it was the charges for bins that are broken or damaged that is not caused by the resident, but that's what happens at the moment. Have I got that correct, or did I misunderstand?
Councillor Bartlett?
It says on the report that replacement refuse and recycling bins for broken or damaged will be charged depending on which bin it is, either at £45 or £55.
Okay, because there isn't a sentence in there about officer discretion. Okay.
And I just, whilst I'm on, I should have inserted the word missing as well.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bartlett. There's a proposal. It's been seconded. I have Councillor Farquhar wishing to speak.
Thank you, Chair. I would probably appreciate an officer's perspective on this one, I would suggest, is because there's a cost implication to replacing damaged bins. I think, A, we need to know on average how many bins there are, and the second one is the concern which I raised that in some parts of the town, e.g. Bournemouth, you will get a larger bin, and those bins are actually older already, and so therefore they're more likely to be damaged. That there hasn't been a consideration that if a bin gets damaged, not necessarily by negligence, but by intent, because somebody wants a larger bin, I don't think that's been addressed.
Okay.
So sorry, again, just to confirm, how many bins get damaged in Bournemouth? How many bins get damaged in Poole? How many bins get damaged in Christchurch annually? Yeah, what's the cost related to that if we replace all of them free of charge as per the proposal by Councillor Bartlett?
Mr. Poultney, are you able to help?
Councillor, I can't give you exact figures at this precise moment in time, but I will be able to furnish members with those figures subsequently.
Okay, thank you. Right, I have Councillor Brooke, please. Councillor Brooke?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm on my way. It's for clarification, really. I seem to have read in the report and understood from the seminar we had, the briefing we had last week, that new properties, new residents in those properties pay for new bins, or at least some of them. Now, is Councillor Bartlett suggesting that the bins which are in the ownership of residents, as opposed to those that are in ownership of the council, if one of those is broken, is he suggesting that the council pays for the replacement bin there when it is not actually the council's expenditure and property in the first place? Or is he also suggesting that all new bins should be free?
Councillor Bartlett, would you like to respond?
Yes, of course. Yes. You know, as I said, it's about the ownership. So if the ownership was with the resident, then obviously any damages caused by themselves would be picked up by them. On the other hand, if the bin owned by the resident was damaged by the council whilst it's being empty, you might reasonably expect the council to pay for it. It's just the same thing in reverse. It's the overriding principle about ownership and who's responsible because you're the owner and who causes the damage.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. I don't actually have any other board members indicating to want to speak on the proposal or the recommendation from Councillor Bartlett. If there isn't anyone else that wishes to speak, I know, Councillor Rampton, you're still waiting for an answer to one of your questions. Can I actually go to the vote on this recommendation before us? And the recommendation is that there shouldn't be a charge for replacing bins if they were either lost, missing, or not damaged by the resident. Is that correct, Councillor Bartlett?
That's correct, unless they own them.
Yeah, okay. So, Mr. Harrod, can I please ask you again to do the roll call?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I shall leave into last this time. So, Councillor Mark Anderson.
For.
Councillor Stephen Bartlett.
For.
Councillor Mike Brooke.
I shall abstain on this one.
Councillor Bobby Dove.
For.
Councillor Melly Earl.
I'm also going to abstain.
Councillor LJ Evans.
For.
Councillor George Farquhar.
Abstain, Chair, with a note that we haven't had the information from the officers, and I think it's not a good recommendation to go forward, but an abstention.
Okay. Councillor Lawrence Fair.
For.
Councillor Mike Green.
For.
Councillor Nicola Green.
For.
Councillor Drew Mellor.
For.
Councillor Karen Rampton.
For.
Councillor Chris Rigby.
Abstaining just because of the lack of information.
And then Councillor Tony Trent.
Against.
And Councillor May Haynes.
For.
Okay, thank you very much. So I have 10 votes for, I have 1 vote against, and 4 abstentions.
Thank you, Mr. Harrod. The recommendation is carried and will be taken forward to Cabinet. I apologise to members of the board because there have been several proposals, so I have now lost track of where I was from the original substantive. So if anyone wishes to speak further to this item, can you actually please put RTS again? Councillor Green, please. Councillor Mike Green.
Thanks very much, Chairman. I've got questions on 3 items, or they're all fairly short. Do you mind if I take them one at a time and see if I can get answers to each of them, which should also hopefully be short ones?
If they're short, because I'm just conscious of the time, but yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. The first one is just on the garden waste, where the intention is to replace the Bournemouth bins with the larger ones. It seems to read in the report that will be done immediately in time for the 2021 season. Is that correct, please?
That's my understanding, yes.
Thank you. The second is on the food waste, where the proposal is to withdraw the free bins, which at the moment offered in Bournemouth. They're not offered in Poole and in Christchurch, and Poole, as we know, doesn't have a food waste collection at the moment. And I accept and agree with the officer's recommendation that given the changes that are likely to come forward in legislation, it would be silly to introduce it for the sake of harmonisation just at the moment. But there's clearly the potential that if people don't have the free food waste liners, that they will stop using the food waste facilities. We have had the situation where it's been running with free liners in Bournemouth, but without free liners in Christchurch. So we should have lots of data across the two for similar households. What was the evidence to show that it shouldn't make any difference if the food waste liners are removed?
I do know that in Christchurch we have very high rates of food waste collection compared with Bournemouth. Ian may be able to come up with some more statistics, but one of the main reasons for me around this is that when free food waste liners were introduced, the processing of food waste was different from how it is now with the provider that we use. So this was quite helpful in our discussion with Councillor Mark Anderson. The idea behind the cornstarch bags for food waste initially makes sense. And previously, when it was rolled out initially, food waste was stored for 21 days, and that would allow these cornstarch bags to break down. so then they could distinguish the residual plastic and remove the plastic. However, now they put it through a centrifugal process within hours of arriving at Piddlehinton, the processing plant, and they use a centrifugal process, which means that any plastic-like material gets spun out and then removed and ends up being landfilled. So they can't distinguish, the process that they now use, they can't distinguish between cornstarch bags and plastic bags in food waste. So the cornstarch bags end up going to landfill. So we're ending up sort of, this is effectively meaning that if we carried on with it in Bournemouth, we're paying £20,000 towards something that's ending up in landfill. So you are right in sort of highlighting, does it have an effect on food waste collection? However, in Christchurch it is absolutely fine. But there is also this additional change that is useful to know about. I don't know if Ian, would you like to come in with anything extra on any particular stats?
Councillor Green, are you content with that?
Are you happy with that?
The next question?
I am content with that. Yeah. Thank you. The next question is sort of in two parts. And we've slightly touched on it already because it's about the residual waste and the bin size. Now, the proposal at the moment is to go from 140s in Bournemouth and Christchurch to match the 180s in Poole. One of the reasons for going to the smaller bin size when that happened in Bournemouth was because it was recognised that if you have a big enough bin, quite a lot of people tend to fill it. And that if you wanted to drive up the recycling rate and drive down the amount of residual, then having people think about what they put in the bins carefully, because they only had 140 litres available every fortnight, was a driver in itself. So what is the effect predicted to be of moving from 140s to 180s in Bournemouth and Christchurch on the total amount of waste, residual waste that is due to be collected? I recognise that it will be offset to some extent by the decision to stop collecting side waste in Bournemouth and Christchurch, but there must have been some modelling done to show what the total effect is likely to be because of changes in behaviour when people have a bigger bin. And I have a second related question to that one, but I'd be grateful if you could answer that one first.
Yep. Again, Ian is free to come in if we have any modelling data on that. Like one aspect of this is to do with the efficiency of the three towns coming together and having consistency of bin sizes. So it's that has been taken into account. I can completely understand your points of having a larger bin. It sort of allows for increased waste and is the opposite of the sort of the normal waste policy. So I suppose the point around this as well is that it's only for bins that are being replaced, so that's only a small proportion of the overall number of bins that we have, and it is also at a time when the environment policy is coming through from government, which is going to change quite a lot of things in terms of how we manage waste. So the other thing that I know that is a current issue is the amount of waste that has been, the additional waste at home has gone up about 10% due to COVID related issues, such as people eating at home rather than going into the office. And another factor to bear in mind is, again, regarding the environment bill that will be coming through, is around moving towards 3 or 4 weekly bin collections. So we have no plans to do that at the moment, but if you're thinking about the next 10 years and what the government's going to do, then that is something to think about as well. Right. I don't know if Ian wants to add anything, or maybe we haven't got time.
Councillor Green, are you content with that, or would you like Mr. Pulteney to?
I would be very disappointed if there hadn't been any modelling done on that. And as I said, my second part of my question does come, if I may bring it up in a second, but see if Mr. Pulteney wants to come in with the modelling.
Sadly, Councillor, there hasn't been any detailed modelling done on this, primarily because of the time that we've had available to us to conduct this. So we took over the Christchurch service in April. The push has been to find parity of service, and what we're using is the national statistics in terms of escalation of waste at the curbside. So in terms of have we done any specific modelling for BCP, the answer is no. But we are recognising through our stats already that there is, as Councillor Rice has pointed out, there's a 10% increase at the curbside in waste arisings. Additionally, we also know that, particularly in Bournemouth, but it's not exclusive to Bournemouth, side waste is a prevalent issue.
Okay, if I may, Chairman?
Yeah, if you got one more question.
Thank you. I do, and just on that one, I have, while I accept that modelling within BCP is going to be difficult, as you point out, there are national statistics, and actually it shouldn't have been too difficult to look at whether there was a significant difference in waste presented between authorities that have 140 litre residuals and authorities that have 180 litre around the country. So I am a bit disappointed in that one. But as Councillor Rice has just pointed out, it will only be as bins are replaced in Bournemouth and Christchurch that they will move from 140s to 180s. I was the one in the seminar who pointed out that in that case, maybe lots of residents in Bournemouth and Christchurch would be quite happy to see their bin go missing, because it would mean that they then had the bigger bin, and that may have caused less reason for them to try to reduce their waste. But even the situation that we seem to have, and it will depend on what Cabinet decide on the previous recommendation that Councillor Bartlett just put forward and was approved, is that while we're talking about moving to a harmonised system, we are talking to all our residents in Bournemouth and Christchurch and saying to them, well, for as long as you don't break or lose your bin, you are going to have a considerably lower, a considerably smaller bin than your neighbours in Poole. And at the same time, we're going to stop collecting side waste. So if you were really having to use a 180, which is what we agree that you will probably need, then, well, tough luck, because we're still not going to, we're not going to take your extra waste away. I recognise that there's a bit of an opportunity for food waste as well, so that comes into it as well. But fundamentally, that isn't a harmonisation. And if Councillor Bartlett's proposal doesn't go through, it's even worse. We're saying to people in Bournemouth and Christchurch, well, you're going to have to wait until you can go up to the same as the people in Poole, and when you do so, you're going to have to pay for it as well. So I really don't see this as being a true harmonisation option. I think it's discriminating against the residents in Bournemouth and Christchurch.
Thank you for that, Councillor Green. No one else has actually indicated they want to speak on this item.
Chairman, I would like a response to that, if I might, please.
Councillor Rice?
Yeah, I was just about to ask if I could respond. So I'm a little bit confused by your statement, Councillor Green. In terms of sort of volume, when you take into account food waste, as you briefly mentioned, like there is only a 6 litre difference between the capacity between Poole, Bournemouth and Christchurch. So it's I don't think it's sort of wildly out from harmonisation. And then the other consideration is that we've already agreed that it's not going to be a huge number of people that are getting these replacement bins, because we're not rolling out the changes for refuse bins. So yeah.
Okay.
And then I suppose the other point was the fact that you highlighted again that with the recommendation of replacing bins for free, if they just go missing, is potentially worsening the position. So yeah, it's just interesting to see that the amendment went through, knowing that will be an issue although we didn't have officer input into that. Thank you.
Chairman, I will stop now, but I have to say I think that's deeply unsatisfactory. Thank you.
Okay, point noted. Right. No one else.
There was a question from Councillor.
Yes, I was actually going to say there is a question outstanding from Councillor Rampton, and then I will, once I've taken the that question, I will move on to the next item. Councillor Rampton, did you want to ask that question again, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was a question on the discount which we used to give for people who were on lower incomes, and particularly on the Access to Leisure and Learning scheme. And I'm not actually sure that that is in the new council is still running. But is there still a discount for people who, for the green waste bin, who perhaps can't afford the full amount, especially now with the price that it's going up to? Thank you.
Councillor Rice?
I do know that the Access to Leisure scheme was something that was pool specific, so it's being considered as a different harmonisation project. And with regards to the green waste scheme, it was too. I don't know if it's continuing for this year, whilst that sort of general piece of work has been done on Access to Leisure scheme, or not for this year. I don't know if Ian Portney has got that specific question, but we can certainly come back to you on that. But in general, the Access to Leisure scheme is a much wider scheme that's being looked at separately from the waste. So I haven't got a specific answer for you.
Chair, could you perhaps come in with an answer? Thank you.
Yeah. Mr. Portney, do you know? So in the interest of, because that time is actually marching on, could I actually put a request in that further details regarding what was the Access to Leisure scheme in Poole, once that's known, could that please be circulated to members of the committee and also to Councillor Rampton, because she is substituting today? If a note could be made of that. I have no one else indicating to speak on this item. So very quickly, members, we have been here since 6 o'clock. It's now 9 o'clock. Does anybody want a 5-minute break, or are we happy to carry on? Right, looks as though we're happy to carry on. So we'll move on swiftly to the next item, which is...
Thank you.
Sorry?
Sorry, I was just saying thank you.
Okay. So the next item is the corporate related. So this is the Performance Management Network, framework, not network. And if I could call Councillor Slade, please, to present this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. This framework sits alongside and complements the corporate strategy and the delivery plans, which we adopted late last year and early this year, and the intention behind it is to demonstrate who is responsible and accountable for the delivery of both the delivery plans and then the wider corporate strategy. It also helps to embed the behaviours and strategy right the way through individuals through to the corporate. So the triangle diagram that's shown within the document explains where those responsibilities sit and give managers the opportunity to assess the teams against the framework. The document also shows the process cycle of how in a typical year, and I would stress in a typical year because this was being designed for a year whereby we would start and then start a new process, that you would actually run over the year in when the annual strategy, when the corporate strategy was being reviewed, amended, how it fits in with the MTFP and how that moves it forward into the next stage. The process cycle for 2021 has obviously been affected by COVID. So it does mean that if you look at the wheel We are slightly behind where we would like to have been for this year, but having spoken to the finance team, the MTFP considerations should be able to get back on track, and actually we did consider those in June, so Mr. Richards has confirmed he feels we're possibly ahead of the schedule on this. The other thing to bear in mind is that this enables managers to start operating proper performance management, which we spoke about in the pay and reward strategy last year, that was fairly new to some of the councils here, and it's been difficult over the last 6 months for managers to set those performance standards, but by having the strategy and the delivery plans, it's enabled staff to be to have a sort of a framework. The intention going forward is that there'll be a set of metrics which will be assessed throughout the organisation. It's not going to be possible for those metrics to be accurately measured at this point in time because so many of people have been working from home, and the autonomy and the systems you would normally expect are unlikely to have been able to be implemented. So the only thing I would say is that there's one thing I wanted to add about this, but it's gone, so I may have to come back to it. But effectively what we need to do is to adopt the performance management strategy so that we can actually have a system to work towards, and then later on this year, I think it's in October, we will actually be bringing forward the final figures against targets for last year, and start being able to look at the figures of performance information for this year. So happy to take questions on it. Sorry if that was a bit muddled, but you've got two issues there: the performance strategy and then how we manage the individuals within that strategy.
Right, thank you, Councillor Slade. Members, anyone wish to speak, or anyone has any questions on this? I have no one indicating that they wish to speak. No? No comments? The last chance. Anybody wish to speak on this? It would appear not. So, thank you for presenting the item, Councillor Slade, and we will look at the other document that you said will come forward in October, and then perhaps there will be more questions might actually then start to appear when they see the whole picture. So thank you very much for that. So we can now move on to the next item, which is the forward plan. I think that has actually been circulated. So does anyone have any comments on the forward plan, or are you content with the arrangement that has actually been in place, which is myself and the chairman actually look through it, and we therefore then put together the agenda for the ONS meetings based on the forward plan? Anyone got any comments on that, or would you like to move on to the next item, which is future meeting dates? I think they are all scheduled. And
I have done an RTS.
Sorry, yes, Councillor Brooke. Yep, yes, please, Councillor Brooke.
It's just a general point in terms of the forward plan. It seems when we've gone through the cabinet papers over the last goodness knows how many sessions, there have always been some where no one has wanted to speak. It therefore seems an absolute pointless exercise putting those in to our plan and bringing them forward and insisting that the portfolio holders present, and then there is absolutely no discussion. It seems to me that perhaps we need a slightly different process for determining what the papers that should come to the committee actually are, and I just wonder whether the chairman could actually consult with the committee before he makes his decision as to which papers are actually presented, because committee members might say, well, yes, I don't want to talk about that one, I don't want to talk about that. and then we only concentrate on the really important and significant things for which there is likely to be a debate. Just a thought.
Okay, thank you for your comments, Councillor Brooke. Got Councillor Mike Green, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I can absolutely see where Councillor Brooke is coming from on that. But for me, I would have looked at all of these papers and said, that's something I'm interested in. The last paper, for example, though, having gone through it in the paper and then having heard Councillor Slade presenting, because of that, I didn't have any questions. So I think that the process works well at the moment with the Chairman and Vice Chairman working out which papers are likely to be of interest to us. The fact that I didn't have any questions on the last one doesn't mean it wasn't of interest to me. It was, and I was grateful to be able to see it. And had Councillor Slade said different things, or had the paper been slightly different, I might well then have intended to come in on it.
Thank you for that. I have Councillor Bartlett, please. Councillor Bartlett?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Of course, you don't know what a paper is until you actually see it. And I agree with Councillor Mike Green, absolutely, that on the face of it, you know, performance management is a very important issue. And clearly, we've got a paper that satisfies ourselves at the moment. The fact that there isn't a lot of discussion on it doesn't mean to say it wasn't useful or valid or something that we shouldn't have seen. So, you know, I really don't think you can second guess it, what's going to be in the paper. In this case, and it's unusual for there not to be any comment, but in this case, I think it just reflects the status of the situation on a very important subject. As it is at the moment. So I have no problem the way the forward plan is put together currently. I think it's working very well.
Thank you for that comment, Councillor Bartlett. I will feed back Councillor Brooks' comments to the chair, because obviously I'm covering for the chair, so I'm not able to actually speak on his behalf without consulting with him. So I will pass those comments on. So no one else has indicated they wish to speak on the forward plan. Our next scheduled meeting is on the 21st of September, and again, until further notice, all ONS meetings will be virtual. So the next two items that we have to go to exclusion of the press and public. Can I please have some advice, Mr. Harrod and Mr. Jones? Do we stop recording at this point? Do I have to read out the clause and then we go to exempt?
Yes, Madam Chair. So ultimately we need to have a proposer and seconder for the clause, which then needs to be read out and voted upon. And then assuming that it goes through, then ultimately we can move through to private session. The broadcast will stop.
Right, so I will propose, well, Councillor Anderson wants to propose, so I will second the exclusion of press and public, and I will read it out. In relation to the following items, the board is asked to consider the following resolution: that under section 100A(4) of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 in part 1 of schedule 12A of the Act, and that the public interest in withholding the information outweighs such interest in disclosing the information. So that is the motion. So please note that the meeting will now be going into a non-public session, and therefore the live streaming will be ending. And as there are no further substantive items on the agenda, it will not resume. The live streaming will not resume. So members, are we happy to support that? And if we are, then we will go to non-public. Anyone to the contrary, please indicate. No? Okay, it appears we're content to support that. So I wish the members of the public who have actually signed on to YouTube to watch the meetings a good evening. It's 9 o'clock, so it's still a good evening. And thank you for tuning in. And we will now actually continue the meeting, but we will be in the non-public session. So Mr. Jones, if I can hand over to you to do the to stop recording or broadcast.